Okay, perfect.
It might be on. You can check.
All right, guys, let's call it to order in terms of. Oh, instead of screaming, that makes sense. Okay, thank you, guys. Welcome to the plenary session of OUSA's 39th General Assembly at Queen's University. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone and introduce everyone. I think this is going to be great. We've had some great discussion this weekend, lots of constructive dialogue on the papers, and I think I myself anyway, I'll speak for much of the steering committee, I really experienced some cool new ideas and constructive feedback coming from the delegates and being incorporated into the paper, so I very much appreciate that. Isabel, do you want to make a couple of announcements before I do it?
Yes. All right, everybody. Hi, my name is Isabel, and hopefully you'll be approving me as speaker. As you can see in front of you, everybody should have within 3 or 4 seats next to them a microphone. If you could please remember to hit the microphone before you speak and then turn it off afterwards. We are being live streamed courtesy of Queen's TV. Thank you so much, everybody from Queen's TV, for being here early and on time to help us set up. Additionally, when it comes to roll call, the people doing roll call, usually it's the representative, steering committee representative. Please note the individuals from your school who are not in attendance when you're doing roll call, and then we can clarify that later if they show up afterwards.
Great, so I'm going to begin with roll call. I'll go down the line. Master, here. Queens, here. Laurier, here. Waterloo, here. Western, we are about half here, but we'll be here. TOSA, here. Brock, here.
Maybe we need to name the delegates who are missing from our.
Yes, and I'll get that to you instantly. And maps. Okay. Great. Moving on. So, look at the agenda. Let's move to, let's go to approving the agenda, but first, any questions or comments on the agenda for today? Any alterations? Okay, can I get a mover for the agenda? Hamadi, seconded by Helfand. All in favor? Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so moved and passed. Approval of the speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Isabel. Isabel was on the steering committee of OUSA last year. She was an incredible resource in Phil Alley's role. The active Queens is often a fantastic issue expert to have on the steering committee, and from what I really heard from last year's SC, Isabel was just exactly that, a fantastic expert to have in the room. I'm sure she will be a great facilitator and guide as we go through today. Can I get a mover to approve Isabel as our speaker? Burkock, seconded by Williams. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, great. Welcome, Isabel. Okay, I actually need a hookup. There's the adapter. I believe that's his name. Can we, sorry, how do we, how do I get a presentation up to the screen? Anyone know? Okay.
If you pick a laptop right here, I think that will work.
Perfect. Sean, can I grab the adapter from you?
Yep.
Thank you. All right. So as we get this thing up, I want to say this is, it's been a great year. Lots of advances, actually, a few setbacks and a few clear failures. But in my report, what I'll be outlining is more of the high-level advocacy and organizational direction, and sort of talking about where the organization's been, both in terms of its core missions and some of the peripheral things it's been doing. You'll see the vice presidents offer their reports in terms of the organizational aspects they've been working on, and there has been a lot of focus on that this year. And the executive director, Sean, will present Home Office's slightly more detailed report in terms of Home Office action and even some of the meeting aspects. Sorry? Okay. What? Yeah. All right. Thank you. Okay. Can I move this? Probably not. Oh, maybe. Coolio. Okay, great. Sorry for that. Thank you for your patience. Okay, fantastic. So it really has been a very busy year. A lot of that has been opportunities that we've sort of chanced and lucked into coming to in the sector. Some of that has been the conclusion of years of advocacy work, really continuing the work of last year's steering committee, but there have been some instances of some pretty solid issues that have been brought up for the first time this year, and we've seen some pretty substantial gains. So I'll go through the motley crew of it all. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the big discussions that we've had this year. This really is a year in review presentation. And And actually what you'll see is after the officer presentations, based on last GA's feedback, we heard that there was desire for some sort of question period, some sort of opportunity for the delegates to ask questions from the executive officers, but also steering committee at large. And so after these presentations, you'll have the opportunity to ask us any questions at all. Yeah, okay. So we'll talk about big discussions, partnerships, advocacy achievements, and failures. I'll go through the advocacy part of the action plan that the steering committee made in July. I'll talk about some of the organizational and governance aspects, and I will talk about what the next 2 months will look like, because there is still some work to do after this weekend's done. Okay, so some of the really big issues this year. We really saw Ontario Online expand in terms of its sector importance and some of the discussions we've been seeing. So that's been an issue that we've sort of constantly flirted with and discussed at OUSA. This is, I think, what, the 3rd GA in a row or something that we're looking at online. And so it really is a constantly changing and shifting discussion. And so no surprise that this is a major aspect this year. We're definitely looking to see what this one evolves into, but this year was one of the more tangible aspects. This one's huge. This one is the major capacity expansion framework. So really campus expansion or creation has been very laissez-faire for a while, but in December a regulatory framework was announced. There was quite a bit of business involvement. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but that was a big thing this year. Transfer expansion and mobility. We actually saw some concrete discussions from the minister about credit transfer and student mobility. So while, I mean, we always joke that Ontario signed the credit transfer accord in 1994 when I was 3 years old. And then a few months ago, I was there at 22 talking to the minister about why it hadn't been done yet. But this year was actually the year when some steps were taken. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. That was big. Internships, youth employment, and employee protections. No surprise, I'm sure if you follow OUSA, you know that this was a big thing this year. Work integrated learning, particularly around how to connect a student's classroom experience with both the broader learning environment and the workplace. So this one was huge, and we'll talk about actually some really cool tangible things in terms of legislation that we've done in the past few weeks. Tax credit reallocation, talking about taking about $300 million in tax credits that aren't potentially used the best way they could be, and instead reallocating them upfront financial aid. That was a thing that USA's always sort of talked about, but this year you'll see that we ramped it up and we made it part of our budget submission. Teaching focused faculty. Again, this is a constant discussion at USA, but this year we really made it a focus in a new way actually in our budget submission and our LobbyCon submissions. So that was actually a cool new spin on that old topic. Tuition billing processes and per-credit tuition. This one, this steering committee takes very little credit over in terms of the actual discussion itself. However, the implementation really was a lot of work with our previous executive director, last year's steering committee, and finishing up with this year's steering committee. That has largely been finished this year. We'll go into what that was. It's a mixed bag of decent, good, and could be better. Rising costs and accountability. This is a discussion that we've had documents about in the past, but this year we actually made rising costs, cost inflation, and a university accountability for those rising costs a discussion for our lobby conference. So that was a pretty big one. And differentiation. Obviously, this has sort of been the whisper in the winds topic over a number of years, but this year we actually saw a concrete framework for the first time. Okay, so what cool partnerships have we either expanded or continued? So obviously we are continuing to work with all political parties. We've seen an increased amount of work with the NDP in particular. It's been really cool to get to know them a little bit more. That is because just a couple more were elected that had a PSC passion, so that's been a great experience, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. HECO, of course, they've released some really interesting reports this year. They're the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario, so we've continued the discussion with them and certainly have looked to them in terms of some of the thought that they're leading in the sector. Alumni, so OUSA alumni. If this is your last GA, don't worry, we're not going to let you go after this weekend. We actually maintain pretty strong connections with our alumni. Many of them hold pretty significant positions in government or in the private sector, or they're just super So it was actually a really good year for alumni. We got a lot of great advice from them on a lot of the advocacy, and so it's always been a pleasure, of course. Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health. This one's actually something that OUSA helped co-found, and it's been a great experience. Sean sits on the, I guess, veritable steering committee / board of that organization as executive director. We have some of the staff who sit on some of the working groups, and so that is all about mental health delivery, and that's been a really, really cool way for OUSA to get new partnerships in the provision of mental health to students on campus. The CFS, we work with them on the Ontario Council of Articulation and Transfer. That's actually a really cool opportunity. I believe Sean made a joint presentation with them to the overall board as we sit on the student advisory board of ONCAT. So we work with CFS on a presentation, and of course roundtables with the ministry, always great discussion there. The College Students Alliance, again, ONCAT, we work with them there. We have a formal tie with them in terms of get out the vote for the election that is likely happening soon, and of course with the Mental Health Innovation Fund discussions. And Council of Ontario Universities and Colleges Ontario, again with mental health, and most particularly actually in some discussions about that expanded regulatory framework. So, the wins, achievements, and advancements. Unpaid internships. This was sort of, I don't want to speak for all the steering committee, but at least for myself, this was a little bit my passion this year, and I think Adam and Steve certainly have a lot of thought on this one as well. This was actually, I think, a discussion that emanated out of the student employment paper last year and then really took off because of the actual efforts of this steering committee and because of Home Office. So we released, with Home Office's guidance and expertise, a youth unemployment government submission, and that one was huge. It was a little bit explosive because we covered unpaid internships, and we were the first student group with tangible solutions to the problem of unpaid internships. Because of Brandon's great work, we had dozens and dozens of media interviews on this. I know Steve spent much of the month of September on radio calls. I did CBC on the West Coast, so we sort of went national with this. And it was a really cool discussion, and we'll talk about, you'll see what happened, but quite simply, the Ontario Health and Safety Act was extended to students in these positions, and really cool, the Minister of Labour took word for word a recommendation from our submission to enforce the Employment Standards Act more concretely and with more resources. So that was actually really cool. That was literally word for word from our submission. OTG co-op expansion. So this one was a really good one as well, and Adam was definitely spearheading a lot of this thought that the Ontario Tuition Grant often doesn't recognize the academic situations of co-op students given its eligibility timeframe, and co-op students have different timeframes than most students, so this co-op expansion was huge. The capacity expansion regulatory framework, again, this is one that was a big win. This is a framework that puts at its center the importance of having student access and need in any new creation of a campus as opposed to economic need in a municipality. And this one was really addressing a lot of our standing policy around student supports and student access. So that one was actually a very direct tie from our standing policy to this framework, and that one was when we really were consulted on. So that was really good. The new ancillary fee regulation, we helped co-write this one. It's not really a game changer in terms of content, but we were consulted and actually had a lot of input in co-writing it to make it more user-friendly. So that was cool. Speaking of wins, we met with Kathleen Wynn this week. Yeah, let that one sink in. Thank you to TK for that great joke last night. All credit to him. Is everyone sufficiently love that joke? Okay, let's move on. Okay,
You laughed last night.
Pardon?
You laughed last night.
I laughed last night, that's why I put it on the thing. Anyway, okay, so it was actually a really cool meeting with the Premier. We were specifically reached out to represent Ontario's undergraduate students in the announcement. So that was really cool. It was about the capacity expansion framework. And we actually, in this meeting, heard some really cool ideas, particularly that deferred maintenance will likely be addressed in some way in the budget. That's sort of what we've been hearing. We don't really know what that looks like, but we're going to keep our eye on the budget, and that again is a pretty cool thing to hear. PIF, the Productivity and Innovation Funding. Again, this one was a major infusion of funding and just a great framework that we were really supportive to see. Work integrated learning. This one was really exciting. So we had a member of the New Democratic Party come to us with a piece of legislation that she was writing to create an advisory council on work integrated learning. This would be an offshoot of the Ministry of Training Colleges, Universities, and would particularly be tasked with expanding work integrated learning opportunities for students around the province. We specifically were reached out to for input on the legislation, and we added a section in the legislation that really ensured that at least there was the conscious thought that these positions should be paid where appropriate. We didn't want to see this lead to just the proliferation of more unpaid internships. So that one was actually direct input from OUSA into a piece of legislation. The legislation passed second reading. Recently it's at committee, and we hope that it will pass through the House and become law. OUSA is actually also distinctly named in that as a partner. So that was really cool. Tuition billing. So this one was the culmination of years of work. I certainly, in this steering committee, can't take credit for all this work because it was the culmination of a lot of effort, but we were heavy into the implementation. So what happened was the threshold for per credit tuition was moved from its sort of informal threshold right now of 60% to 80%, which means, for example, if you had 5.0 courses as your full course load, it's now 4.0 instead of where before it was just like a bottom of 3. So this literally means that at least students will be, if they're going to be paying for education they don't receive, at least they're paying way less and they're receiving more. This is the okay part is because this will come into effect by 2017, so it's not an immediate implementation, but at least it's progress. One really cool thing that was the work of this year was we said, all right, if you're going to do that, okay, but please give an exemption to any student with a disability, so that because they often have challenges in taking a full course load, they shouldn't be punished for that. And so now any student with a disability is exempt from flat fees at any Ontario university. So that's really, really cool. And that was directly us. This was the work of our previous ED, Ryland. He negotiated to keep the moratorium in place, and because there was heavy talk of it being lifted. So what this means is that no school who is currently at a per credit rate can move to a flat fee rate. So that's really, really key. Okay, as well, students can pay per term by 2015-16, I believe. What this means is instead of one massive sum in the summer, you can pay over twice, so you can use some fall income to pay. That one was great. It's particularly big for students at Western who are challenged a lot by that lump sum payment in the summer. And deferral fees are entirely eliminated. So that one was really cool. There still are late fees, but there won't be deferral fees as we knew them before. Okay, so failures. We advocated very hard on tax credit reallocation. This did not happen. And so the reason this didn't happen was quite simply we saw both administrative and political opposition to it. The administrative opposition was largely that it would be a very difficult thing to do. We were disappointed to hear that, as largely that meant that the administration largely hadn't looked into how to do it. But whatever, we understand that there is politics in politics. So we took that one with a grain of salt. Politically, this is a difficult topic, as the idea of removing a tax credit implicitly means you're increasing taxes. So it is a very difficult one to sell before an election, but we really did a lot of work on this one, and we're going to keep going at it because we're going to see if any of the opposition parties have the stomach for it. This could make its way onto a platform at least, but it did not happen as we wanted to. Online evaluation fees, this one is a loss. So previously, students could not be charged to take evaluation online. That was the previous framework. In the whole per credit tuition, billing processes, that whole thing, what came out of that was not that students can now be charged for online evaluation fees. What it means is that each student government must negotiate this with their campus. So whereas before it was just can't do it, now it's up to each student government to make sure we can't do it. So unfortunately, this isn't a complete loss because it doesn't mean that if the policy is reversed. It just means that every student government at this table will have to take this on and protect their students from being charged to take tests online. So that one's an unfortunate loss, and we signaled disappointment with that in December if you saw our press release. But yeah, teaching focused faculty as well. This was a budget submission ask and a constant ask. There's interest in it, but unfortunately we're asking for money in a no money time period. So this one was also really didn't go as far as we wanted. Now the differentiation framework, some parts of it really are not positive for us. There are some parts related to access, as you've seen in the differentiation framework, that seem to be incentivizing universities to differentiate on the idea of access to education. So that one for us is one that we had clearly signaled to the lead negotiator on the government side, Dr. Paul Genet, that we were not okay with that. Unfortunately, it still came out in the framework. So that is a setback, but we obviously do have a lot of advocacy to do, and the paper that we're just looking at today anyway addresses that. So I'm just going to go through the action plan very quickly. It touches on a lot of what I already said, but I just wanted you guys to see it. So this was, again, this is the action plan that the steering committee makes in the summer. This is exactly it. We report back on how that action plan went. Sean will be reporting back on the organizational aspects of it. We wanted to make better use of steering committee and satellite lobbying. This definitely is ongoing. It's a continuing topic. We've definitely had steering committee often take this upon themselves in their local advocacy weeks with some support from Home Office, but it certainly is ongoing. Advocacy priorities. So again, student employment. I said we got some really cool new movement. There were many meetings. Roundtables is actually a roundtable on unpaid internships we're scheduled to go to very soon. So that will be great. But yeah, this is what our action plan looks like. A mix of very clear wins, again with the Employment Standards Act, some clear losses on the evaluation fees, and some stuff in progress. Okay, financial aid. So lobbying on the overall OUSA implement, deficiencies of current needs assessment formula, more non-repayable financial assistance. So this one, again, is just ongoing. We put this in our budget submission, particularly around some of the OSAP assessment failures in terms of how OSAP assesses the needs, NOTG assesses the needs of Aboriginal learners, mature learners, etc. This is ongoing. The reason I haven't put a call on this one is because we really don't know what the budget looks like yet, so we might be surprised. But again, we got some new stuff on the OTG for co-op students, but other than that, we're still waiting to see what happens. Lobby to improve teaching quality, particularly through transformation discussions with the ministry. I think we can all in this room thank Spencer from MAC for really being a thought leader on, also count how many times I say thought leader today, it'll be a lot. Being a thought leader on pedagogy and teaching. He's really driven the discussion at steering committee. And what we did was we specifically talked about this both in the roundtable discussions with the ministry on differentiation as well as with the regulatory framework stuff. So this is largely ongoing. We've had some really, really cool meetings on this, but of course, something like the teaching quality is an ongoing discussion. Okay, so lobby to increase post-secondary participation rates for underrepresented groups. Again, so we in terms of our own action plan, we passed a comprehensive access policy last GA, and we have a couple really cool demographic-specific policies this GA, so there's been some really good policy thought on this. What we did as well was we actually made access a huge part of OUSA's employment submission. So typically you don't think of employment as an access piece, but we really sold it because of this liberal government's sort of thought on a fairer society. We sold it as, if you want a fairer society and you want access, what you need to do is you need to create employment opportunities, and universities are a great way to do that, university education. So that was really the spin that we took, and again, we saw some really cool stuff. Again, there was a huge infusion of new money in terms of employment access-wise, in terms of wage incentives for young workers. I'm not going to take any sort of credit for the organization on that one, because that one was largely the government's work on like much younger workers, and so that one didn't really have a huge impact on university students. In fact, it didn't really also have a university focus at all. So I mean, it was a really cool thing to see, but this is an ongoing one. We wanted to finalize a new tuition-related fee policy to address payment deadlines, etc. Again, this one is a lot of really clear wins, but they're going to happen a couple of years from now. Okay, student mobility and credit transfer recognition. So this one was really cool, actually. So I'll go into more detail. We saw some significant credit transfer movement this year, and I actually anticipate for the next steering committee people in the room that credit transfer will be a thing for you next year. We saw, as part of the ONCAT group, some really cool work on the actual physical website that students can use to check to see whether their courses transfer or not. And then the minister made a very clear commitment to creating an articulated transfer system and a pathway system, both through the differentiation framework and through ONCAT. So there was, for the first time, at least in my involvement at OUSA, a very clear word-for-word commitment from the minister that this was going to be a focus. So this is really good to see. Online learning options in Ontario, again, we had a roundtable with the deputy minister on what online learning even looks like and what the nuance between brick and mortar and online learning are, and why that's not just black and white and there's a whole spectrum. We really are just continuing with this work in terms of Ontario Online. So this one is just ongoing, and Sean is heavily involved in that. Student health, physician compensation models. I mean, we held a meeting with the Minister of Health on this one, and it was actually really interesting. She's trying to get a lot of support for it, but we haven't seen any movement on this year. But there have been a lot of discussions, and we hope that this will be a discussion that continues. We've had some really high-level discussions on this, as you can see. OTG eligibility. My background should actually be a little bit green. Again, co-op students saw new eligibility this year, but we met with the Minister's office multiple times, and again, a very clear one for co-op students. And engaging on voluntary student unionism. So what this was in the Progressive Conservative White Paper, the idea of student unions being voluntary for students. And that is a little bit concerning because it sort of came out about concerns about accountability in terms of the use of student dollars at some campuses, and for the most part, OUSA's members are pretty responsible, and we use those fees to do some pretty good things for students. We worried that this would actually hit student unions in the knee and really make our ability to advocate more difficult. So this one is sort of up in the air. We don't really know what this one is. We had a member of the Liberal caucus express interest in a private member's bill on this. We'll see where that is. We're still going on it, but it is very much up in the air. Okay, I'm almost done, but I really wanted to signal that this year, of course, this is an advocacy organization, but of course we collect significant student dollars from our organizations. We do a lot of, and we need some solid governance. I think the executive and myself and Home Office have realized that sometimes in the past, OUSA sort of ran by the YOLO model of governance. So we don't really like that. We're not really about that. So we really wanted to take some time this year and ensure that there was solid governance work done. So the VPs will talk a lot more about this. I just want to say that this is a team effort between Steve, Adam, and myself. Steve is the master of the budget. He is doing a lot of really cool work to ensure that both the use of student fees is effective, the use of resources is effective, as well as our financial policies are all in line. Adam has also been doing some really cool work. Of course, you've seen his work on the bylaws, and he's put a lot of effort into that. He's working on operating policies right now, related to things like how steering committee meetings work, what sort of the year looks like, and HR. So again, we really want to ensure that the wonderful staff we have are supported as well as possible. And so we're going to do some really big thinking and consult some expertise to ensure that our HR is about as solid as it can be. And lastly, the next 2 months, can't get rid of this yet. Governance updates, again, working with the executive. PieHead, which is a far less pie-based thing than I originally thought when I heard of it. PieHead is the Partners in Higher Education dinner. There will not be any pie at it. Again, it's disappointing. But it's going to be a really cool event in a couple of weeks. We have some fantastic leaders from around the sector. We have former Premier Dalton McGuinty coming to speak. I don't know who your steering committee people are only our select, but we'll have administrators from the university, students, sector leaders, tons of ministers, MPPs. So that would be a fantastic opportunity for OUSA to maintain its connections and sort of celebrate a year with the sector. The budget and the election. So there will definitely be a budget because that's how democracy works. So we are definitely going to be looking to see what the budget looks like. Probably in the next few weeks, to be honest with you. We're looking at a very short timeline on this one. Myself and Sean are keeping an ear to the ground to see both what the budget will bring in terms of whether new programs or even new money. So we'll see there. And then tied to that is the potential election. So we are hearing rumors that an election might happen in May, June. This is, obviously not ideal as it really limits our get up and vote capacity because people largely aren't on campus except at some of the co-op schools. But it is something that we will engage on. Steering committee had a meeting yesterday talking about the election. We're looking at some cool online stuff to do. We're trying to see if we can host a debate between the minister and the critics on post-secondary education. And we do think that actually education might be a factor in this election, whereas we previously were concerned that it wouldn't be a discussion. So we'll see where that goes. Okay, and transition. Again, we want to ensure that the next steering committee has the most resources to jump into their role. So steering committee, we're going to be working on transition, and particularly the executive transition, to ensure that the executive officers who come into this role have the knowledge to be able to lead the organization. And of course, information sharing and institutional memory, just ensuring that all of the great thinking that was done this year by thought leaders is transitioned to next year and kept for years to come. So we've moved to a lot of, sounds simple, but writing things down, which is great. So we have actually a lot more institutional memory as a result of some of the work this year. We're going to keep going with it. And that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call upon the Vice President Finance report.
Yeah, I probably should do it.
to make sure that we look into things like contracts to get home office staff to use their professional development spending. Obviously, that's an organizational benefit as well as a personal benefit, so that's good to see, as well as reimagining some things for student opportunities, developing our student leaders. That's obviously a critical piece, and we didn't really have as much focus on that in the budget anyway this year, but we did have money left over, so we'll have to get creative and think about that for next year. Kind of the last things that we'll be highlighting more on the policy side is following up on a few items, making sure that we're in compliance with some audit things, especially on the control side, but more so on more frequently getting financial reports and doing some more informal reporting throughout the year, especially the steering committee, just to make sure that everybody's aware of what's going on and we're in good shape on the budget. Mainly that's kind of it for the budget and the discussion. We're going to be doing budget consultations with steering committee and home office the next couple weeks, but other than that, we're mainly just looking at policy. But happy to take any questions that you have on any of the financial items or otherwise. Oh, Carol?
I'm harping on this point. I said it the last GA, and Ryland sort of gave me an answer, but I'm not sure what was been followed up on that. But I know that sometimes there's criticism towards the OUSA budget when there's the lobbying expenses and it's so trivial, allegedly, within the greater picture of the budget. But I mean, having been involved in OUSA, I see all of it technically as part of lobbying, and I was wondering if there was any thought given to changing some of the naming so that we wouldn't get that kind of undue criticism in the future.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to look into that as part of the next iteration of the budget, if we can more accurately align that, because I agree with you that it doesn't really represent what we're actually doing. It's kind of disingenuous to the budget to say that it's not lobbying, because you could really say that, especially in the last couple of weeks, Brandon and Sean have been doing a lot of lobbying. Should their salaries count towards that? If you rebalance it, is it a different situation? So we'll look at that in the context of it too, and we'll see what our options are, because I agree, like, I think at this point it's a couple $100 for travel mainly and a little bit of food budget, but we'll look at it. This is the time to do it now that we're going to be putting together a new budget, and then we would obviously present this year's budget as a comparative so that it's obviously better for people to see it.
All right, thank you very much. We now have the Vice President Administration Report.
All right, this will be really, really short. So bylaws, as you know, I've been working on updating the bylaws to make sure that they're compliant with new legislation. So looking forward to any questions that you might have when we discuss them today. Not hearing very many, I'm looking forward to hopefully them passing very quickly. Then we'll have to register them and then make sure that our lawyer's patent are updated. And so Sean and I will be working with the lawyer that we've been working with through that process to finalize and make sure that these are all well and in good order. Operating policies. So one thing that I wanted to let folks know is we've actually developed as a steering committee a new media protocol. In particular, what this media protocol does is just clearly defines exactly what we see as external media sources in regards to OUSA and what we see as local media sources in regards to OUSA. So when it comes to external media sources, that really is defined as anything that's not in the local region of a member association or actual campus media. And in those instances where an external media source is looking for someone to be a spokesperson on an issue related to post-secondary education, the Director of Communications is actually specifically prescribed to go through and ensure that there is a student, if that is at all possible, and so therefore they are required to go through steering committee and exhaust that list before they are able to provide comment themselves or any of the home office staff members. And the idea behind this was to ensure that we always have a student face to our organization. I think that that really helps with putting a lot of the personal stories that students have, and that really helps us to do a much better job of our advocacy, because when people hear specific stories from students, we're actually very persuasive. When it comes to local media sources, when on OUSA matters, steering committee members are able to respond very quickly on their own. However, they are welcome to When it is a local media source that has contacted OUSA, the Director of Communications will work specifically with the steering committee member from that local association to ensure that there's a relevant person providing comments so that it is still a relevant source. The other things that we'll have to do in terms of operating policies is once the bylaws are approved and filed, I guess I should say if approved and filed, we will have to go through with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that all of our operating policies are now compliant with our bylaws. In particular, as I had mentioned before, associate membership status was defined in our operating policies, so that's one thing that will have to come out and then be rehashed in terms of what the relationship is and how associate members will be serving the steering committee. I'm trying to go through my brain. There's a couple of other things that we'll have to do. I know that we're looking into, as Amir stated, going through all of our HR policies and making sure that they're very clean and up to date. In particular, our evaluation procedure for home office staff is something that needs to be looked at. And I'm trying to remember anything else. We're also looking into the job descriptions for the executives. I have notes and I can't see the notes. What is the program? Why do you make notes when you can't see them? Yeah, so job descriptions for the executive will also need to be reviewed because we might be doing a little bit of a rehashing of exactly where the jurisdiction falls on things and probably making the president more of an advocacy face and the VP Finance and VP Admin really helping from a supporting perspective on the finance and human resources and administration of the organization standpoint. Finally, just things that I've been doing in terms of serving as an executive. That is something that's really important, and in particular for the incoming steering committee members when you take on an executive role, if elected. You're wearing two hats. You're wearing the actual hat of a president or a VP, but you're also wearing a hat of an executive, and there are some things that go into that. So supporting hiring processes, supporting performance evaluations, and then working again with Amir and Steve on planning transition. In particular, the VP administration has a little bit more of a role in that, and certainly I think we're looking at strengthening transition, making sure that transition conference is a lot more robust, that we go through a lot more of making sure that we're really passing off the torch in a much more intentional way. Transition conference in the past has previously been focused a lot on the advocacy priorities, but I think there is a recognized need that transitioning the organization, the governance, the administration is also a really key part of that, and making sure that everybody is up to date. So working on that with the executive. That's it. Any questions? VP Admin is so much fun that you guys have no questions for me.
If you do come up with any questions, you can also ask them during question period. There will be further opportunities for questions. And Adam, if you're done, then I'd like to welcome the Home Office report.
Amir, did you want your office to? I did want your office.
This one will be pretty short and sweet. Amir claimed all the really good big stuff, but that's fair, he's the boss. So my role as the executive director is to support the steering committee in being the leaders of the organization, making sure that they have the appropriate information, but also I'm here to translate mostly going to be reporting against the action plan, but there's a couple organizational things that I'd like to highlight and some general bragging about my staff that I'd like to do. But for the most part, we'll structure it around the action plan, which is really at the core of how my day-to-day and my activities are governed. So some of you are new delegates, some of you are old delegates, and some of you are old delegates who's taking a break. So by our very nature, our contracts are limited to keep the place generally youthful. I'm probably the oldest relic you're going to find at OUSA at any given moment. And that's probably a good thing, but it does mean relatively high turnover. So there's a new ED this week. He is me. There's no longer a director of research. And so we'll be posting for a new addition to the research team very shortly. And I know some of you in the room who applied for this will be bringing on a paid research intern to the OUSA office shortly as well. This is my meeting activity, or our meeting activity. I'm taking a lot of credit for Rylan. When they first posted the job, I'm like, wow, this is a really interesting time to transition in because you're gonna have to stand up here and be like, these are all the things I'm told happened. Some of them I was participating in, but I wanted to highlight some meetings since November. In particular, we had a meeting with Premier Wynne and Minister Dogood on Thursday, which was a really cool way for me to start the job, but is also really good for the organization. We had quite a few meetings with the Premier's office on a variety of issues, and that's where a lot of the sausage gets made. We, of course, regularly meet with the Minister of Training Colleges and University. So in addition to the meeting with him and Premier Wynne, we met with him personally 2 other times since November, which is pretty good. That's actually a pretty big uptake on things. And, you know, many meetings with the staff. We've met with the Minister of Labor, as well as some staff from the Ministry of Labor. And then, of course, the sausage for the sausage gets made in the Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities. So myself and Rylan probably spend 1 day, 2 days a week there practicing somebody. And then, of course, a variety of other ministries touch on nearly every aspect of student life. So we regularly meet with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Finance as relates to unpaid internships, that sorts of thing, and also just generally occasionally pop over there and help TCU make their case for more money. And then there's the political side of things. So we, of course, have a responsibility to, I think, hedge our bets. So we regularly meet with the Progressive Conservative Party and the NDP, who have actually both been very, very helpful in helping us push a couple issues that maybe the government might have been show a little bit of reluctance to tackle on without some cognitive resonance. So we've got very, very productive working relationships with both. And of course, we regularly meet with the critics as they're the mouthpiece on this particular issue, but we also meet with many people in the caucus. And then, of course, it's a pretty big, sprawling, and complicated sector, so we have an obligation to you guys to go out and regularly meet with universities, regularly meet with Colleges Ontario, meet with the faculty associations, the other student groups in the province, the College Student Alliance, and the CFS. Anytime we can come together, we get very, very, very clear indications from the Minister and from the Premier and from the rest of Cabinet that anytime we can come together, our voices get a little bit louder and things get done a little bit faster. So as you can see there, we've sort of been all over the place in the last couple months, and we'll continue to do so in the next couple months. I also wanted to highlight the Student Advocacy Conference, affectionately known as LobbyCon. This was one of our more successful, and I think a lot of credit goes to Carrie and Brandon for that. So we met with over half of the MPPs in the province, and we managed to track down most of Cabinet, which is pretty significant. We also met with all the major stakeholders in the sector. This is a really good opportunity to settle on one concrete message. We do meet with them very regularly, but it tends to be on a variety of issues. Anytime we can sit down with the entire sector as a whole around one particular thing, in this case our lobby document, it kind of helps align everybody's priority, and so we put students in front of all major stakeholders in the province on education. And of course, as we mentioned yesterday, priorities were around tax credit reallocation and student financial assistance, youth employment, and fiscal accountability. So moving into the action plan, it's subdivided by operational areas. So you're going to see a research bit in there, you're going to see an organizational, communications, and discussing their shelf life today, but up until this point, the shelf life has been 3 years. So you can see if we're doing 6 papers a year, and they only last for 3 years, we're pretty much at the limit of what we can regularly do in terms of policy papers with the staff that we have. So we're looking at a couple different changes to the policy process to maybe make it a little bit more flexible and a little bit more sustainable. One of those things is moving to a 4-year cycle, but drawing on, I think, something we've kind of ignored in our own bylaws, which is we allow for tiers of reopening, which you've seen with online, and you'll probably see with other papers in the future. We conducted the biannual student survey of member campuses. Being a former DOR, I'm pretty excited about this one because we got tons and tons of great data. I wanted to take this opportunity to highlight that we did do that. We have reports coming, but I also wanted to thank you guys for your work in promoting. I'm sure many of you in the room kind of helped your steering committee member promote that survey, and it provided us a very, very rich set of data, and is actually going a long way. Now that we're into the 3rd iteration of the survey, it's providing us some longitudinal data, but people have really come to rely on this thing. People get excited about this thing. I'm actually touring around a little bit, talking about the first report that came out of it. So I'm excited for the organization because this establishes us as a primary research organization with access to the kind of data that a lot of people don't get. Communication action plan items. This is largely handled by Brandon. Some of us step in, but we can't spell real good. So this is largely Brandon's domain. So we continue to distribute the monthly communique, which is our newsletter. Brandon can probably speak to the penetration or breadth of that, but it gets around. We often hear from people in the sector that they look forward to this thing, and they draw from our ideas. OUSA's blog has been busier than ever before, and a lot of that, again, goes thanks to you guys. I can see some faces in the room that contribute blogs, and the more we can get from the students on the ground, the less Brandon has to heavily edit what I write. The director of comms has developed a blog series and a blog schedule, so we had a couple theme weeks along the way, and it's kind of nice when we can address an issue in a short period of time from a couple different angles. And we're working on publishing our annual magazine. That'll be coming out mid-spring once the dust settles from Piehead. Focus media outreach to campus and local newspapers. Brandon hustles. There's been a significant increase in the amount of local and campus coverage of OUSA issues. Again, thanks to you guys for kind of helping build that resonance on your own campuses, but our media has never been better. Implement a campaign on student financial assistance. Campaign conducted. Post roundtable discussions at various member campuses related to PSE issues. The last of the roundtables were completed, was it last week or the week before? It's all blurred. This was something that we hadn't really done before, and steering committee directly asked from us, essentially a database of our connections in the industry, the meetings we've had with them, the things that we've talked about. And again, this speaks to this institutional memory piece and this writing stuff down approach that we're trying, that Amir mentioned. And reorganizing historical administrative documents. There's a lot of paper for an organization that's been in the same place for over 20 years now and started before the internet was super cool. We have a lot of documents to go through, but it's important for our organizational history, and I mean just for legal and financial reasons to have all these things organized in one place, and so we're getting all that where it should be. OUSA on campus, better engage campus researchers and coordinators on campus. That's probably always going to be listed as underway. You guys have been really responsive with most things that we've tasked you, and that's been really, really gratifying. It encourages us, and hopefully it encourages you. Revamp training day to make it more useful to relevant campus coordinators and researchers. So we expanded our training day in, pretty sure it was September, early October, to get coordinators and researchers up to speed. I know many of you were there. That training, or that content is being improved upon all the time, but I can tell you as a campus coordinator from probably 4 years ago, it's a lot better now than it was. And provide communications templates and other materials online for member use. It's important that you guys be able to drop in and access a template or be able to get some ideas on how to do a presser or take a look back at some of the things that we've done as an example. So Brandon has created those materials and they're available for researchers and coordinators in our Dropbox. So that's pretty much the story for me. I wanted to highlight as well just how hard everybody at home office staff is working. It's kind of limiting the report against the action plan when the day-to-day really involves a lot of running about. But I want to take a moment to thank the staff for everything they've done and to highlight what I think was a pretty successful General Assembly conducted, man or woman short. So thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions you might have during the question period.
Thank you very much, and I know everybody is really excited to get into the policy papers, but we do have one more presentation, the presentation of midterm financial report.
Already did.
Oh, all right, so we're just going to skip right over the presentation of midterm financial report because we saw that in the VP financial report presentation. We are now entering question period. If you'd like to ask a question, just raise your placard. I'll call on you. Say, once again, the name of your school, your last name, and then who the question is addressed to. So are there any questions at this time? Yeah, Colin?
Colin Zersberg, Leeds delegation. I was just, it's actually a bit of a point of order too. Not actually a question. There's a motion on the agenda regarding the midterm financial report. Do we have to vote on that motion?
I think you made Elsa's day. She was frantic.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for pointing that out, Colin. Sorry about that, everybody. Can we have a motion to approve the midterm financial report as delivered during the Vice President financial report? Lots of placards up. Ahmad, and seconded by Rose. All those in favor? All right.
idea that Ali won't shut up about, and that it was a really, really cool one. We incorporated the paper, and that's just one example of a lot of innovative ideas. And the updates we're presenting today are actually more of those. They're delegate driven ideas. So this one is, is it not? If you guys just want to follow along on the thing, can you do that on your own?
Look for the green.
Yeah, so this is on page 30.
I just did.
Oh.
I don't.
What? Oh, tree. Sorry. Nope, wrong side. And there she is. Okay. And no, I can't see it. Okay. So this
Yeah,
print.
green is a terrible choice. Yeah.
Would it be possible for you to change the font to brown?
Let's change it to. Let's change it to orange.
Let's do like red or something.
Or purple, the best color there is. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can I change it black? What's that? What am I looking at? Because I actually can't see this. Nope. I think I have.
Is it highlight?
Okay. I don't. Stop. Stop doing what you're doing.
I didn't know the word that meant.
I'm really sorry.
How about we read it to you? Would you like us to
How about
read
we
it?
read it?
Because the track changes are that color.
How about
You
we
can
just
color
open it
track.
on this?
Ooh.
Just click on a review. And then it should be like something.
Everybody has their computer.
Or you can just like
Yeah,
or you
okay,
can
so
just-
everyone's gonna have their computers out.
Okay, we're just
Everyone
gonna
scroll to that page.
we're just gonna go follow along. You'll do it. You're adults. Okay. So yeah.
Privilege, some of us can't get on the internet,
True.
so, yeah.
Point of information.
Point of information.
If you want to log on to the internet, go to the Queensy network. If you don't have, what's it called? Euroband? What I call the wrong thing.
And Jerome just worked for me after a couple tries. It's better than the Queen's Network. So.
Okay, if you go on the Queensy network and if you, I'll Facebook all your steering committee members again, the password and the username, and then you can log on to that. Cool.
All right, I see a placard at the back.
Point of information, if you go to your computer and do system preferences display, you can switch the alignment so you can see it both on there and on the screen.
True.
Thank you.
I'm in poli sci. We still use parchment and
Displays.
quills.
I found
so.
display.
I think arrangement, and then if you mirror the display. Ah. What a time to be alive.
Nancy, I'm open. There has 1,140 messages in his inbox.
That's not me, that's Sean. I do my emails.
That's not my work one, that's my personal one.
I don't know where the
The work
paper
one
went.
I want to talk
I saw
about.
that. Wait, how did you make it
I
tiny?
quit. I resigned.
Go back to making it tiny.
We're really sorry. Like we mean well.
The end. Thank you. Mirror.
Okay, so why do you take over?
I did these words.
Okay, there it is. No. Okay. Oh, is it the same? There's gonna be a motion to impeach any minute now. I'm clicking on it, but it's not working. Like I'm actually.
While you're here.
Lunch is coming here.
Live PC.
Lunch is coming here, so we can go.
Like this PowerPoint is taking over everything. Okay, we're trying. Okay, what if we
Is
hide?
anyone
I see
here
a motion,
computer
I see a
expert?
placard up here, yes.
Can I motion out the Queen, the delegate from McMaster to go do it?
The chair would look favorably upon that, yes.
Point of information. Command
Oh.
Q closes stuff.
Sorry, you need to be recognized by the chair. Yes, Representative Zarsworth.
If you hit Command Q, you'll close whatever's open and dominating the screen. one, again, this is a delegate-driven one. This was a really cool creative piece brought, of course, by a Western student to this paper. It's about protecting students in the event of a faculty strike. This was sort of an incidental piece, but it really was an important consideration. So the principle here is that as tuition fees are designed to cover core costs of education, students should not be expected to pay for education not received when faculty go on strike. So this is sort of the principle that if a strike occurs, student dollars, you shouldn't be paying tuition for classes that you're literally not receiving. So that really is a principle-based perspective, but also what happens is, and you'll see in the corresponding recommendation, if we go down to it, so there's also a concern that faculty strikes disrupt classes and the overall academic experience for students, often leaving students paying for education they do not receive. And this has some examples of strikes at Mount Allison, University of New Brunswick, St. Francis Xavier. So these were multiple weeks of lost classes. In fact, the University of New Brunswick Students' Union, they did a really interesting thing where they literally had a counter on their website that was tracking wasted tuition dollars. So it was over $1 million by the end of it, and this is tuition that students were still paying while they were not in classes. And this is very clear. It's not meant to be a thing that's saying that faculty, are the problem, they should not be going on strike, but it's just quite simply recognizing in the B and the C that a faculty strike does have some impact for students. And then we go to the recommendation. Universities should provide compensation and educational accommodation to students who experience a faculty strike at their institutions. So quite simply, if a faculty strike occurs, the university should be compensating students for the classes. And that sounds like students are getting a payout for not going to class. We're not saying that they should be compensated. We're saying that they should literally not have to pay, and in so doing be compensated for that time. So that really is the big, it is a principle-based recommendation, but it also has a really, really cool side effect, which is that it actually, if you think about it, removes students as a bargaining chip during any sort of negotiation. So oftentimes, either side in a strike situation, the university or students would potentially play a brinksmanship or even align the timing of a potential negotiation or strike call with when students are on campus. This is a big example for us back home at Western. We know that there is a potential for some sort of similar action next summer, well this summer actually, but in all likelihood, if an event occurs, it's going to be in September because that's when students are around and there's actual, teeth to the matter. So this actually removes students as a bargaining chip. So we actually had the consideration of, wait, doesn't this actually make this a bigger incentive for faculty to strike if the university has to pay for it? Like, isn't this insult to injury on the university's part? And the case there is no, because the university isn't paying, they're not paying out during a strike, so they're actually not paying faculty. So what we're saying is, in fact, it's not that the university has to pay above and beyond, but instead of the money that was going to be going to faculty for those classes, instead it goes to students for the tuition that they were paying for those classes instead. So it really is a cost-neutral solution for the university. So it's not as if the university would be held in a more difficult position because of this. It's actually completely cost-neutral. All it means is that students would be compensated and actually removed as a bargaining chip.
It's actually, I guess, mitigating a current incentive that exists, for universities to go into strike based on the fact that they're actually saving money there. So,
yeah.
So it's actually balancing out something that's in place right now.
So that was a really neat recommendation, and so we put a PC and an R there, and we actually got some great examples if you look at the body text of places where legislation like this is being proposed. And then this one again. Wait.
Yep, this is matching.
This is the matching one. Yeah. So this was the matching one we were discussing. You want to talk about them?
Yeah, so this was a recommendation by a delegate, but this came forward to address the fact that right now deferred maintenance dollars are very low, and we're seeing very little money spent towards revitalization in existing buildings. People usually like to have a name tag, so often you see new buildings being opened, and the government has incentivized that through matching programs in the past. So many of the buildings that you even see on Queen's campus right now, the government paid for half of that, the institution raised the other half. So the idea here would be to have a similar matching program, but instead of being for new buildings, it would be for a
delegation bring up some concerns about the status quo sort of leaning argument in the paper before, where we sort of didn't really want to touch this issue. And I think over the past couple of days, we really worked hard among steering committee to see if we can come up with some good policy compromise. And well, this is it. So university academic ranks be added as a named group to the Protecting Public Services Act 2012 Schedule 1. So this is largely a measure to bring compensation from the broader public sector into line with the province's goals for deficit reduction and general budgetary management. So what this would do is actually achieve the outcome that the McMaster delegation was talking about when it came to that arbitration amendment. But we think as well, so achieve that outcome, but do it in a more politically palatable and less risky, I guess, way. It is still a big step. Due diligence sake, it is a big step. But I think it's a really neat discussion to be having. It's a good one for students to be raising, and I do think that this has been a solid compromise. And I'm hopeful to hear you guys discuss it and see if you believe so as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know Amir said this is a compromise, but I think in many ways this is actually a more tailored solution, because what it does is it first takes what we were originally looking at with the arbitration rules in terms of consideration of ability to pay, and it implicitly applies that to the sector, to faculty compensation specifically. But beyond that, it actually allows more of a sort of tailored toolkit of policy tools to be applied, just in recognizing that for every group that is under this act, there actually are some more specific recommendations, and as Sean has referred to them, to take like off-ramps, he's called them, in terms of different options that can be used on the way to that point. So I actually think this is potentially a strong recommendation, just in that it sort of is more comprehensive and tailored to this specific group.
No, it's not mistaken.
I think that's it.
I believe that is it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that presentation. We're now looking for a motion to adopt this motion to adopt, and from there we can also move into a discussion about amendments, if that so pleases everybody here today. So I see Carter, seconded by Murkoch. Any points or motions on the floor? Okay. Yes, sorry, Campbell.
Andrew Campbell from the Brock University Student Union. I'd like to motion to amend the resolution
Okay.
to be it further resolved, the section on differentiation shall be reviewed and revised by OUSA for the 2015 Spring General Assembly.
All right. Any further comments on that motion? Representative Zarzo.
Can I request that Representative Kimball just provide a little bit more background on that request?
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, differentiation is a new topic. We heard all weekend about how this is an emerging field and how we really don't know what it will look like. So by coming back to it with potentially more information or turnover, I think it's a really good thing to look at in terms of what the new political climate will look like next year. Just so that way, I think I think the recommendations are good, and that we've done a good job throwing darts at a board that we don't know what looks like yet. But as soon as the board starts to materialize, it'd be good to kind of refine those darts.
All right. Any further debate on that motion? Yes, Franchetto.
Sorry, can we just get clarification whether that would require a steering committee to rewrite the section paper or just provide a verbal update in SGA?
Oh,
Sorry, I
sorry.
think
You
Amir
have to be recognized before speaking.
Yeah, how do you point of information?
Then say point of information.
Point of information to wish to speak. Can I please request that every delegate use the mics so we can hear them clearly? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Representative Campbell, do you want to respond to what you'd like to see?
Yeah, is this better? The mic? Yeah, absolutely. I would like to see steering committee first perform a review and potentially say, hey, like, it hasn't changed at all, we still don't know any information, in which case I don't think a rewrite is needed. But if there is more information, as more information comes, I would like to see a rewrite take place.
All right. President Efton. Oh, sorry. Efton.
Extra carport. Don't worry.
Efton Carver.
It took me a while. I said that joke literally every time someone said that. Anyway, so yeah, I completely agree with you. I've said throughout this whole process that this is a paper on an emerging issue we're trying to figure out how to maintain that, but also use our resources more effectively. So if I might suggest a different amendment, which would be that I do want to see this paper looked at next year. What I might suggest is that the General Assembly, I don't even know if this is possible, but just task the steering committee with maintaining and investigating this and bringing it back in the manner most appropriate in the policy framework. Just because I want to see it back as well. I really do want to see this discussion emerge, but I think it might be a thing next year, depending on how the election goes. But I just want to ensure that we do it, that in doing so, we do so in line with our new thinking on the policy process, if that's okay.
That change would be friendly.
Okay. So it's my understanding that your motion thus could be phrased, that steering committee be tasked with updating the differentiation framework section of this policy paper as per OUSA's forthcoming policy on policy papers. Does that really fit into what you're kind of getting at? Okay. Any further discussion on this, Representative Zarger?
So I'd like to move to amend the motion maybe in a more formal way, so that the motion reads, be resolved that steering committee investigate whether or not the differentiation section of this policy will require an update, and then advise at the upcoming GA on the status of that.
That's much more formal and much better.
All right, are there any further discussions on this motion? On this amendment, sorry. All right, all those in favor? Those opposed? Abstentions? All right, I hope that's being recorded. Somebody, sweet. Any other further discussions on yes, sorry.
Someone write me the amended motion out, please.
Actually,
Yes?
Can somebody write me the amended motion for
Yeah.
minutes?
Representative Zarzor, can you send that to over there? Perfect, thank you. I saw a placard over here.
Jacob Klugsberg, MSU. I'd like to motion to amend recommendation 37 to read, institutions should move towards decreasing merit-based financial assistance, reallocating existing funding towards needs-based bursaries until unmet need is met.
One moment, please. Okay, can you reread them?
Okay.
Or if possible, get Sid, just pass it out.
Yeah, in writing.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to override the chair, but if we could get
Yeah,
amendments in
sorry,
writing.
from now on, when you have recommendations, if you can either write them on pieces of paper if you have them, or if not, type them out and then send them, I guess, to your email.
Yeah,
So there's a few reasons why I'm moving to amend this. First of all, our concern is based off of rising expenditures of merit-based financial assistance and the lack of expansion of access and needs-based. By decreasing, we would be accomplishing what I know Sean did in his calculations in addressing that unmet need, and based off the calculations he did and myself, there is room to not fully go from the current percentages of 85 to 15 to the opposite of 100 to 0. There's room to decrease that, and especially since the calculation that occurred did not even include any beyond purely entrance-based, merit-based assistance, so that doesn't include any upper years or renewals of those entrance scholarships, which I believe every single institution here except McMaster has the ability to renew those entrance scholarships. Additionally, I think, I know I don't have that much time, but I have a few other points. Additionally, if we do eliminate the institution-based merit assistance, we'd be only leaving the private scholarships, and that would create disparity between different institutions. And although that currently exists, by eliminating the institution-based, that would further kind of go against what we say in other parts of our policy, where we're creating winners and losers. For example, directly in concern 43, we say students believe it is, or recommendation 43, we say students believe it is important that no new funding scheme inherently creates winners and losers. If we completely eliminate merit-based and only left the private scholarships, we would be doing that because certain schools, smaller schools or with a lower alumni network or a smaller alumni network would be losing out on these private scholarships. Last, I do believe that this recommendation helps our lobbying capabilities. As we know, whether or not we agree with it, institutions do use these merit-based financial assistance as incentives for students. If we're arguing that we're completely getting rid of this incentive or completely getting rid of the university's ability to use these, we would have less lobbying power than if we say, we don't mind you keeping some of this, but we do want to just change around the proportion so there is these unmet needs are still being met and there's more focus on the needs-based assistance.
All right, and my apologies, everybody. I forgot to ask for a seconder for this amendment. So would anybody be willing to second this amendment? Campbell? All right, discussion is now open on this amendment. Recognizing Alison Williams.
Yeah, I'm Alison Williams, steering committee member. So first, in terms of the cost expansion, I actually believe this would make it worse, only in that if you still have merit-based financial assistance, then institutions will look to grow that area. So yes, unmet need will already be met, that'll cover it, absolutely. But now that we're precluded, or we're leaving open that option for merit-based financial assistance, you have more money flowing into that, and recognizing that it is a recruitment tool, and recognizing what institutions use it for right now. So what this would actually do, I think, is make the cost pressure far exacerbated. So in that sense, I think we just need to find a way to address that sort of policy problem right there. The next thing that I would note is if we have already covered all, all unmet need, we're now saying that we have public dollars going towards student support, where student support is no longer needed. It's not required, it's now nice to have, not a need to have. So I would encourage everyone to just think about the implications of that in terms of the fact that public dollars are now going towards more kind of supporting a student who doesn't necessarily require that. And I would note that the private scholarships are still in place. So there still are those incentives, there still is that support. And this would just mean that it's coming from taxpayers. The next thing is that I can't stress this enough. I said it in a few sessions, and I guess I'm not explaining myself very well, but this would not create winners and losers in terms of private scholarships. Right now, there's already a disparity between the private scholarships that each institution has available. That disparity would not change. The difference is not the hard number of scholarships you're able to offer, it's the difference between institutions. So let's say right now one institution is offering an 8 and one is offering a 6. And we take away all of the public pieces in that. One institution is offering a 4, one's offering a 2. The difference is still 2 in both cases. I'm sorry, I don't really know how to explain this any better, but that disparity already exists. So taking out just this public portion of it wouldn't actually have any change on that. I guess just quickly, the important piece is not the fact that everyone is decreasing a little bit, but the fact that differences still exist and always have and will, and the same schools will be disadvantaged the same amount they currently are. So if we want to address that, the only way to do that would actually be to bring more merit-based assistance from government dollars into institutions that currently have a hard time recruiting public or private dollars. So if anyone needs more explanation on that, I can try to offer it. I'm sort of struggling to do it. I struggled in this session as well. The last thing about the
Colin Zerser, Queens AMS. I'd like to speak in favor of the option of elimination as opposed to just the decreasing. So I think that was against the amendment. So just a few quick points. In support of needs based over merit-based, the role of public governance is not to reward where people are strong, but rather to support where there is need. And so just on the merit of that this is a public-based fund, that I think we should keep that in mind. When we say that if we did this, that we could reduce all the need, I think that that statistic is incredibly important, so we should keep that in mind. As well, wealth and grades are not separate. Many of students' grades are tied to their ability to put time into them, so we should keep in mind that if somebody's putting a lot of time into their grades, that means that they have the option to not put time into a part-time or a full-time job, which many students do, or extracurriculars. And as well, this doesn't account for difference in grading between schools, but whereas need is actually a unilateral measure. And then, so just with all of those points together, I'd like to urge this assembly that we should move towards the elimination and move towards needs over merit. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognizing Member Wright.
Stephen Wright, Western delegation, speaking against this amendment. To me, I'd just like to echo some of the former comments. This is a very principled approach to me. I don't think we can put in half measures for this. I really do not feel that it is the government's job to reward where people are strong, like the former member said. And I think as far as lobbying goes, this actually, to take this half measure would kind of weaken our policy stance, and we really need to take a real principled approach, and it would show that we really do stand behind the principles that we subscribe to, and that will help us in any lobbying efforts in the future as well.
All right, seeing no more individuals wishing to speak. Oh, sorry, recognizing members. Can you just raise your microphone so we can get your name? Les.
Yeah, so Augsburg, I'm speaking for the amendment. Yeah, so a lot of the concerns that were brought up, we're still addressing this, the need for more need-based financial assistance. By decreasing it to the point where all unmet need is met, we're still accomplishing that same goal. We are still doing exactly what our concern says. We're still doing exactly what our principle says. Based off the calculations that we've done with the numbers, we're able to address that unmet need. We're able to address what our concern is. We're not completely eliminating, we're not taking away incentives for success. And although I do agree that there is a disproportionate, sense of low income and success, and there is that relationship there, one, it still is a proportion. We're not looking at everybody who does well is from high income and everybody who doesn't do well is low income. So there still are people that are, I think, benefiting from this merit-based financial assistance. And there are also, I think it's important to us to incentivize success, incentivize hard work, even at the secondary level, and we can still kind of meet both of our goals of our principles of incentivizing success, but also meeting all the unmet need and the need-based financial assistance through just decreasing it. I don't think that an elimination is the only way of doing this, as proven by the numbers. I think decreasing would do a sufficient and enough of a job of what we want and what it says in our concerns.
All right, recognizing Member Chisty.
Trustee Queens AMS. So I am also speaking against the amendment, so just to address what the member just brought up right now. I'd like to repeat that I do think that needs-based money means a lot more, and I don't think that a needs-based system doesn't incentivize success, because we already have merit-based scholarships at all of our universities that do that. I know the policy paper authors brought this up yesterday during our breakout, that the number one thing that alumni want when they call for donations is they want a scholarship named after them, and those scholarships tend to be based on merit already. But the other part of it is that merit doesn't necessarily reward people who actually need it. Success is already rewarded in a lot of other ways at universities. But the other point to keep in mind is that the biggest reason I don't like this amendment really is that it says that after the unmet need is met, we should be going back towards merit-based, but I think there are other things already addressed in this paper where that money could be going better. So for example, we've talked about deferred maintenance, we've talked about teaching and learning, teaching focused faculty where there's no money, and I think all all of those things should be higher priorities than merit-based scholarships. Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to speak on this?
Yeah,
Councilor Williams?
Yeah, Alison Williams, State Committee Member. So just to address a few of the points that were brought up, to clarify. So yes, we have already addressed unmet need. I do recognize that piece of the recommendation. I think that's a great thing. But I would stress again that this just means that the government is now providing money to students who do not need that money. So that's just something to think about from a public policy perspective. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think that's an important piece of this debate to consider the implications of that. So the next piece is the fact that success is still incentivized through private dollars. I absolutely do see the merit in incentivizing success in our students, and that is something that already is in place. There are a lot of private scholarships available, and there would actually probably be more in this case if this amendment were to go through. In terms of decreasing versus elimination, I would note that the numbers, this calculation was just based on this year. With increasing enrollment, with the fact that we still have areas where the system is growing, I think it's important to note that we wouldn't necessarily have this kind of buffer of leftover money next year. So this is just calculated based on the size of our system right now. So I would sort of caution against assuming that there's just kind of this now leftover pot of money that we've created exponentially or that's going to be available for many years to come. And then the last thing that I would note is just I would remind everyone that this is at its heart a cost inflation paper. I do see the implications of this recommendation related to financial assistance. In my mind, it makes a lot of sense. I think in steering committee's mind, it makes a lot of sense. But at the end of the day, one of the things we're trying to address here is the massive increase in cost caused by merit-based scholarships, and that is because they are used as a recruitment tool. That is because they are not primarily being used to target need in the system. And that means that if we still open up a space for merit-based assistance, even if we have all unmet need covered, then we are going to be funneling money back into that. And now, because the arms race will now include covering all unmet need as well, you're just going to have more money. So when you look at it just from the perspective of its utility within this paper, it is now doing the exact opposite of what we are looking to do in this paper. It's directly I think it just kind of flies in the face of exactly what we've tried to create with this recommendation in the first place. So I would kind of encourage everyone to think about this as a cost inflation paper as well and look at the effect of this recommendation in terms of the cost inflation piece. Thank you.
Seeing no further speakers, we look at voting, I guess, on this amendment. All those in favor to the amendment to recommendation 37 as moved by Representative Klugsberg and seconded by Representative Campbell. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? This motion fails. Any other amendments on the floor at this time? Representative Ahmad.
So I would like to make an amendment to recommendation X3.
Personal privilege, please turn the microphone.
Sorry. I'd like to make an amendment to recommendation X3 to say universities should provide compensation and educational accommodations to students who experience a faculty, staff, or TA strike at their institution which results in a closure.
All right, is there a seconder for this motion? Seconded by Tubachisti. Any discussion on this motion? Just raise your placard and I can call on you.
Just wait till someone before.
Yeah.
Actually, no.
Faculty and staff and TAs.
Oh.
Oh,
even if they miss class time.
Follow-up?
Yeah, it even just means like compressed, varied or different academic schedules, exam schedules, right? It's literally the idea that quite simply the term shouldn't be lost.
All right, we're good to go. Yes, Representative Hamad.
So the reason I made this amendment is because obviously there's the possibility of other people other than faculty going on strike and this having very bad effects on students. And so I thought that if we advocated for any really type of strike, then we're more likely to be able to have accommodations in if there's any issues with regards to strikes at our universities.
All right, any other individuals looking to address this? Oh, yes, Representative Graham.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say I'm speaking in favor or against. I would just encourage the membership to think about, I guess, the coreness of the staff and TAs. So generally speaking, if a staff, a staff union or a TA union goes on strike, many classes still can go on. Of course, students are taking a hit there, but then we have to start thinking about, all right, well, like, how do we weight the value of a teaching assistant or a staff member versus a faculty member, and that could get complicated. So I guess this is just something to help encourage everyone's thinking on this matter.
Yes, Campbell.
I'm speaking in favor for this amendment. I know, for example, with Brock, a lot of the time the staff and TAs and faculty are all, I mean, one strikes, they all strike, to some designation, so some classes will be canceled, some will not be. And that cancellation of some classes and not all is still very, I mean, that's always a problem for students to face that. So in terms of including this to be a little bit broader, I think it makes more sense.
All right, thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to ask the authors of this paper if this is a friendly amendment or an unfriendly amendment.
Yeah, this is largely friendly. I think that Spencer brings up a really good point, but I think the nuance in the recommendation captures that it's only if it results in a closure, right? Because staff strikes can result in closures of classes because of lack of provision of other services. So I think that is a good point. I just literally am thinking out loud. Could we add some nuance in there about more specifically class cancellations, or do we want to just keep it closures?
I'd say that's probably the educational accommodation.
Yeah.
All right, usually in the rules of order, if it's deemed friendly by the authors or the movers of this policy, which in this case would be Ali and Amir, then it doesn't need to have debate. It's just incorporated into the text. So clarifying that, it might still be good to have a motion since there's already been one moved and we're having substantive debate on the amendment. Is there anybody else willing to, interested in discussing or amending this amendment at this time? If not, then I guess we can look at the mover once. Oh, sorry, Representative Burkoff.
Thanks. Is the spirit of my interpretation of the spirit of this motion, or this amendment rather, is to cover any strike or any closure that results in a strike. I'm just wondering if there are, maybe I'm not thinking, maybe this is a very obvious or stupid question, but I'm thinking if there's any other stakeholder group that's either there or might emerge, if it might be better to simply remove any mention of a stakeholder group that goes on strike and just mention strikes in general. Just posing that to the floor.
All right, if there's no further discussion on this, we can look at adopting it.
Is that something?
Oh, sorry, yeah, Cuban?
Clubine.
Clubine, sorry.
Andrew Clubine, Waterloo Federation of Students. I'd just like to
so integral to getting into classes, that'd be putting the university in a situation they have to reimburse tuition for an external group strike, which I don't know if there's, that's just my personal opinion, but if there are any other thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
But I think the way the
Oh, sorry, you need to wait until you've been recognized. Sorry about that. Franchetto?
I'm just speaking in favor of the amendment, just because I think in general it would cover it under, since if it's a strike and it's impacting class closures or cancellations, that in general it would be such an impact to students that it would sufficiently deem compensation should be required.
All right, Representative Burgok.
Hi. I think so. To Amir's point, I think it's covered already because it says strike at their institution as opposed to like adjacent to or external to.
All right, is that friendly to the original amendment? Awesome, lots of friends happening right now. Good. Are there any other points or motions or amendments to any amendments? Seeing none, let's have all those in favor of the amended amendment as originally moved by Representative Hamad. All those in favor, all those opposed? Abstentions? And we're good to go. Are there any other amendments to the policy paper at this time? Yes, I'm sorry, I couldn't see your placard.
Kate. Can I just yell, or do I really need to use this?
It's for the video as well.
Hello, okay. Case Laurier. I forwarded the recommendation to Sean. It's for recommendation 37. I would like to see it be read as, one sec. Institutions should move towards the elimination of merit-based financial assistance, reallocating existing funding towards needs-based bursaries through a provincially mandated framework. We can't let it to give institutions their own opportunities to set the needs, like the level of needs-based funding. So having a provincially mandated framework allows it to have equal access across the province.
Is there a seconder for this amendment? Franchetto? And we'll just wait a couple minutes until it appears in front of everybody. All right, so I've received word from the authors of this policy paper that this amendment is friendly. Is there any discussion at this time?
Sure. Just to clarify, I don't like the moving towards. It's not shouldn't be necessarily done provincially, but it's just the actual allocation of funds should be handled through provincially mandated framework. That's really the point of clarification that I have.
All right, if there's no further debate surrounding this amendment or no further amendments to this amendment, I suppose we can move it. So all those in favor of this amendment to recommendation 37 as moved by, and as seconded by, sorry.
Yeah, I think so. We just got a little confused based on what we aren't good at what we're doing right now. So maybe. Yeah, so I think we just got a little bit confused by our thinking what this meant is we now as we think it's something different.
Ask a question.
Yeah.
So, I guess, point of information that may be helpful. So right now, when institutions are looking at need for students, they do use an OSAP calculation.
Yeah, my confusion is a provincially mandated framework a euphemism for OSAP? Like, I guess.
Just right, I mean, maybe Sean can speak more to this, but like right now, when an institution looks at the unmet need of students, they're using an OSAP calculation anyway, so it is already provincially calculated. That like that's already how institutions assess need. It's based on provincial, like on the existing provincial framework, which I would argue is OSAP.
Okay.
So maybe it's not particular. Like I'm just wondering because it looks like we want to create another framework. If we're cool with still using OSAP.
Yeah, it depends on just how the framework should go here.
Reminder to raise your placard, and then I can recognize you formally. And also, everybody in the steering committee to speak into the microphone, so we can be recorded. Yes.
Well, I think I think we could all see that there's issues with the current funding model through OSAP. So I don't necessarily know if that's the direction we want to go in. That's pretty much it.
Okay. Recognizing Member Williams.
Yeah. So one thing that I would just note is that this comes in concert with our entire 170-page SFA paper. So any changes to OSAP that sort of need to be made or that we've seen and put a lot of time and thought into sort of recognizing and suggesting, that all actually would fall into this as well. So if it's being assessed through OSAP, you just remember that kind of from a sort of policy standpoint, we're also covered in terms of any problems that students have seen with OSAP up until now or that OUSA has suggested with OSAP up until now. So hopefully it would help with that as well. So it may not be entirely necessary just because we have everything in place in terms of improving the OSAP process, and then OSAP is the mechanism right now that's used to assess need.
Is this, out of curiosity, authors, is this amendment still friendly?
In here.
I mean, I just think it's redundant.
Yeah.
I think it's a good point, but I think it's just redundant.
Okay. Representative Zarzar.
Colin Zarzar, Queens Miss. This is a point of clarification. Would changing this wording have any functional consequences on this piece, or regardless of how it was phrased, these two ways, would it make any difference?
All right. Member Williams.
So I think that the fact that that's a question is a problem, just in terms of the fact that we don't understand right now whether or not this new framework actually would be OSAP. So it could be interpreted as, okay, so we're just doing what we're already doing, or it could be interpreted as we need a new framework, which we then haven't explained at all. That's my concern.
Okay. As the seconder to this motion, sorry, would you like to speak to it, or?
I would actually not be in favor of re-amending it, so I'm in favor of it just being through OSAP.
Representative Cates?
So then, I make an amendment to the amendment.
Yes.
So instead of the word provincially mandated framework, could be the provincially mandated framework. Is the one that and it would actually imply that it's the one that already exists, be used.
Yeah, it's your amendment, so you can do whatever you'd like with it at this stage. I suppose that we could also see further discussion on that point. Or is there anybody else willing to speak on this amendment? Member Williams?
Yeah. So yeah, that's fair. I'm not sure that sort of even provincially mandated framework. I'm interpreting that as being OSAP, but that's not really an official term for it. I don't think it's really referred to as a framework. I'm just still worried that it's a tad ambiguous. That's my only concern. Like I really think that we can leave it out because right now current practice is to do it based on OSAP, and we have so many things that we've already said about improving OSAP.
Anybody else wishing to speak on this motion? If not, then we can vote on it.
I think Sean had a good. So this is what I'm thinking on this. Sorry.
Yes.
Sean, did you want to say what you said to me?
Yeah, generally they use a needs assessment that's very similar to OSAP, but they're not mandated to. Just as a point of clarification.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
They use a needs assessment that's generally the same as OSAP, but they're not mandated to.
Okay, so mandated they use OSAP.
That's entirely up to you, but it was just a point of clarification about that.
before moving away, all this would say is that when an institution calculates need within their institution, when they're addressing need, they would do it based on OSAP's calculation of need.
Yes.
So that everyone recognizes these, like it's not that we're actually moving towards having OSAP administer. All it means is that right now institutions can use OSAP's calculation of need when they're assessing their own students' need and unmet need. This would just say that they now have to use that everyone should use the same formula, which I think makes sense.
Representative Graham.
Yeah, I understand. I just think that I don't even think we should be using the word provincially mandated framework. I don't think we should necessarily be using the word OSAP. I think that confuses the issue in this already kind of confusing issue. So again, like I would speak against just this entire amendment and just leave it the way it is.
All right.
For the sake of ease.
For the sake of ease. Any further discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, we now go into a vote. All of those in favor on the amendment to recommendation 37 as displayed on the board, as moved by Representative Cates. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion, all abstentions? The motion fails. Any other points or motions on the floor at this time? If there are no further amendments to this policy paper, I suppose that we can ask for a mover on. Agenda item. I'm assuming it's being moved by you. Okay. Do we have an individual wishing to move a motion to adopt the policy paper in its entirety? Sorry, apparently we didn't do that earlier. Addison, and we have a seconder. Wilson, trying to differentiate schools over here. Yes.
We did this.
Did we?
We did. Yeah.
Who was the mover and seconder?
It was moved by Carter, seconded by me.
Okay, sorry about that. Apologies and apologies to the people that I just recognized as moving it and seconding it once more. Maybe you will get your moment of glory in another few minutes. Don't worry, there are still multiple policy papers left to approve. All right, all those in favor of adopting this policy paper? All those opposed? And abstentions? Two abstentions recorded. All right, it passes. It's now my understanding that we will be breaking for lunch. I'm sure that you may want to be seated for about 5 minutes so that somebody may turn on their microphone and let us know what the plans for lunch are.
Are we doing a break? So, no, other than lunch, like when do we want to resume? It's a bag lunch, so we can eat it right here.
Can we get a motion in favor of who would like to have a working lunch?
Like work and eat.
Yeah, work and eat at the same time. Okay, all those opposed?
Alright, so
The motion fails.
guys,
Okay.
what we're gonna do is everyone's gonna get out of here. Sorry.
We can't minute and eat at the same time.
They have to take minutes and eat. And
If I may abuse the position for a second, can we take a 10-minute recess, let home office have some nourishment, and then keep going? Excuse me, a 3-minute recess?
All right, we can meet back here at 1:10. 1:05. 1:10. All right. Good.
Oh, don't sell yourself short. You can do it.
said, it's a great opportunity for the rest of us to keep chewing. So that's where.
Cool. So this is the first track change that's at, that's a light. That happens a lot. This is the mic. Okay. So the first change that we made last night was just adding a little bit of body text to recommendation 1, which just says that all students should pursue the path that's best suited for them. But an Assembly of First Nations survey found that 7 out of 10 First Nations youth aspire to attend post-secondary. Yeah, there's a little bit of body text in this one that's new, just saying that guidance counselors, because that's expanded on quite a bit in our access paper, but it just says that they should be well versed in the benefits of attending post-secondary. This is kind of the infrastructure.
Oh yeah, so one of the other considerations that we were, that came from a few of the sessions yesterday was the fact that band schools tend not to receive adequate funding for quote-unquote ancillary things, like libraries, computers, extracurriculars, and infrastructure may also be underfunded in there. So we actually had this already in the paper and didn't realize it, but there's just the highlight of it reflected in it. Or do we just, that was marked there?
Right. Yeah, this was just a quick addition in out there. It's just saying this should be building upon the work that's already done in Aboriginal communities.
Oh, here, yeah. Not the specific thing, but
Yeah,
on the issue that was the concern, actually. Yeah, so this one was reflected, we heard some requests for expanding on the financial challenges that non-status and Métis students face. So OUSA managed to find some research on the funding issues. So it mainly surrounds that PSST is still an issue. There may only be $2 million in funding overall. And overall, the Métis Nation of Ontario survey asked how many students experience financial challenges, and it was about 80%. So I feel like that pretty well defines the issues that Métis students are facing. Oh, to comment on this, so we had some questions yesterday about the Ontario tuition grant, since we're expanding eligibility for the entire duration of the post-secondary career, or sorry, undergraduate and post-secondary career. So we looked at this, and the OSAP only covers, I believe, 7.5 years total. This would limit the gap on how long people would actually attain this for.
This was just a very little addition of body text here stating that in order to support student success, institutions should consider implementing Aboriginal pedagogies or portions thereof where possible, just because there was some concern about how would they be implemented and the feasibility. So just making sure that it's one, it works where we can, and one, it would support student success.
our main point on this, and maybe home office can support filling some gaps here, but our main point of access is on campus for consultations. We felt that our consultations reflected the diversity of perspectives. Many of our Aboriginal student directors, I believe Jan, have worked with extensively with these communities, and the students, especially in the focus groups that we had consulted, do come from a diverse set of backgrounds, so we felt that those perspectives were already included without necessarily needing to talk to every single different position.
Is this amendment friendly or not friendly in the eyes of the authors?
Sorry, can you just say the amendment again?
So this is a be it further resolved statement that when the Aboriginal Students paper next comes up for review, the authors will consult with First Nations community leaders and frontline support workers on reserves.
All right, and could you also send that in to? Awesome, thank you. Yes, recognizing Pritchard.
You can go first. You can probably help me more. Can I ask that Elsa speak first? Can I pass my speaking rights to her?
Yep.
Thanks.
So I just wanted to clarify that the operating policy states that we'll
Point
take.
of personal privilege, sorry, GC's microphone's
So I just wanted to clarify, as far as I understand, the operating policy says we will take reasonable steps to consult broadly. Just in terms of staff resources and the practical limits on our time in order to do further consultation, that was one consideration as well. So I just wanted to make it clear that it's not that Home Office didn't want to do this consultation or that the authors weren't willing to do this consultation. It really is partly to do with limitation of resources as well.
All right, recognizing Franchetta, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm not going to speak for TK, but I would say this is not friendly, just in the sense that I think we did take reasonable steps, and I don't think that I think we did our due diligence on this paper, and I really believe that we did go above and beyond what we previously did, and I think that just being practical with our consideration of what we're asking from Home Office and from the authors, it just does seem a little bit unreasonable. I think that you could probably expand that list to a very wide variety if we go to this.
Recognizing President F. Tech Carptor.
There you go. It gets better with practice. Yeah, I actually just wanted to caution against this amendment. I'll speak here actually as the Western Steering Committee member. Home Office came to Western and did a roundtable with a large number of Aboriginal students. So what you actually, I looked at the paper and I literally, in instances, hear their thoughts recorded into the policy. So just speaking from the Western perspective, I can't speak on behalf of all the other schools, but I felt that our Indigenous Services Office and students at large were heavily consulted. That is sort of the intention across all of the institutions. The only reason I caution against this is that we tried very hard, the Home Office did try really hard to ensure that students were consulted at every single campus. Sometimes the scheduling from the Indigenous Services Office at the respective campus doesn't come up as well as we would like it to. That's incredibly unfortunate, but I think that reasonable steps are really tried to be taken, and precluding the policy paper from coming forward because of the difficulties of logistics, sometimes just given our reality, I caution against that, but I fully understand what you're saying. But I fully understand what you mean. I just think that we, especially from the Western perspective, I feel the perspective of Western Aboriginal students, I saw it were really, really heavily taken into account, and I hope that in the future we can continue to really try that across the board.
All right, Campbell?
Yeah, so I guess I should explain why this has come up. I talked with several different band leaders and I guess leaders of spots. It didn't take me much time. I mean, it was 3 Skype phone calls that lasted less than an hour. So in terms of resources that I personally used, it was just time. And then even in terms of, yes, I think you've done a really good job outreaching to current Aboriginal students at a PSE institution. That is not getting at the students who haven't made it there yet. That is not getting at the students and the difficulties and the struggle that they are facing on reserves of actually getting that attainment taking place. I understand that a lot of the professionals that feedback that I had directly about this paper was that it's not going to do any good because it's not addressing what the needs are on these reserves and getting post-secondary education attainment. Due to that, I mean, I think these steps are really good, but I would just caution that next time we go that extra little step further because the actual resources, a couple Skype calls, and I mean, coming from a lobbying organization, they're more than willing to give that feedback. It was not a hassle for me, just as a delegate.
All right, thank you. My apologies, everybody. I forgot to ask for a seconder to the amendment. Is there anybody willing to second the amendment? All right. Looking at Drew. Sorry, your last name? Usaki. Thank you. Any other points of debate on this? Representing member Pritchard.
Well, Thomas Pritchard, Queen's Amen. So I think like I would echo a lot of kind of what Elsa said, and that like I don't disagree with the sentiment, and I think we all believe that consulting is important. But two things: one, I would caution against kind of underestimating the amount of resources because of when something goes into a paper. Like even when we did the focus groups, it involved releases and being able to there's a lot more than just kind of being able to ask for information. There's a lot of process around making it into like actual primary research, which is new stuff that they taught me this year. So it's not kind of like there's a bit more complexity around it when it's research for a paper. My only other thought, and I don't know if you're the right person to ask this is that I'm not sure whether or not this would actually belong as like be it resolved in a paper. It's not really a policy stance. It's more of a kind of operating issue, which is why when Member Garcia mentioned that it's in our bylaws, operating, that perhaps I don't know. So I don't know. I don't know that it would go in a paper. That's the thing, right? I mean, if you're concerned with a consultation, I think that that's a question of our overall process and not necessarily a question for this specific in a specific paper.
Recognizing member Eftik Kapoor. If you weren't here right next to me, it'd be a lot easier.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I think that again, I really do believe in the spirit of what you're saying. Just bouncing off of TK's point, I think maybe a more appropriate motion might be outside of the actual policy paper itself. Perhaps GA, tasks the OUSA executive to look into this and the operating policies and see how more consultations with like outside of the university context could be done. And I, solemnly swear that we really will look into it with the best faith. I'm not trying to say this, we're just going to put it into a committee and kill it. We really will look into this, but I just think that probably could be the best way to do it outside of putting it like into a policy context. That's a suggestion.
All right. Are there any other further points of debate on this amendment? Yes, member Kemp.
I guess then, with that in mind, is there a way to move this motion to be that? Like how? Like would that be reopening the agenda to include it in there, or would that be the way to go?
I think what you're discussing Abstentions? All right, that's it. Thank you very much. Moving, moving on to item number 8C, international students. Be it resolved that OUSA Assembly adopts the policy paper on on international students. Yep, sorry. Yes, recognizing Member Temple.
I'd like to motion to open the agenda.
Okay, is there a seconder for this motion? President F to Carrefour. Okay, it was sideways too. It's getting better. All right. So all those in favor of reopening the agenda? Okay, sorry, you're gonna have to hold them up for a second. All those opposed? That works too. So this clearly passes. The agenda is now open. Any other points or motions on the floor at this time? Member Kimball?
I'd like to motion to add to the agenda the discussion that took place in terms of opening, I guess, the policy papers or the way the research is conducted.
Would you like this to be a discussion topic, or would you like this to be a motion or an amendment to the operating policy?
I guess a discussion topic might serve best.
Okay. So that would be going on as motion number 12, and adjournment would then become motion number 13. So be it, is this another, okay, yes, carry on.
Can we move this up to take place between these two papers now? Just to have this kind of settled with so I don't forget about it later. To be perfectly honest.
I think that, I mean, technically, yes. You could, you could technically move it to have it now. That's the decision of the assembly, whether or not they'd like it now or later. So having it as point A, no, it would have to go to point 9 because point 8, sorry, is all the policy papers, right?
Yeah.
So it would have to be, yeah, it can go on as 8C. It doesn't really flow perfectly, but I mean, it's up to you guys if you want that or not. Yes.
Yeah, what I would suggest here is that, just to keep it in context, operating policies are crafted and made by the authority of the board. That's just sort of how operating policies work. So I would suggest that, again, this GA, as members of the corporation, we do high-level governance here, and I think a discussion as to the principles would be fantastic. I just warn against the creation of a new operating policy in a 50-person plenary. I think the most appropriate thing there is for the GA to task the executive officers to look into that and take it to the steering committee, and we absolutely will. But if there's to be a discussion, I think probably a high-level principle one would be most appropriate.
Also, and I apologize for this, and let me know if you'd still like it as point 8C, but there's a presentation on the bylaw and operating policy changes. So if we're getting into a larger, perhaps more explanatory discussion about the nature of operating policy, it might make more sense to have it around that discussion, so maybe 10B, in order so that the conversation on operating policy changes can flow from that. We can put it as 8C if that would be your preference, though.
Seeing nods from the steering committee members who are bringing that forward, I think that would probably be better.
As 10B?
Yeah.
Okay, so all those in favor of having a discussion on operating policy changes as section 10B of the agenda? And those opposed? Awesome, thank you, and we got it on, so hopefully I don't forget about it when we get to that point. You'll remind me. So going back up to the agenda, be it resolved that OUSA Assembly adopts the policy paper on international students. Do I have a mover for that motion? Yes, Klugsberg at the back, sorry, and Addison. Can I have the authors of the policy paper come forward to the front? You will have 10 minutes to introduce.
Okay. So as for your feedback yesterday, we made a few changes. So, sorry, one sec here. So principle 1, we added Ontario-specific data. Very minor, we were asking for more specific data. Go. Okay, so principle 2, we added to acknowledge the diversity of lived experience of international students as per requested. Let's see.
steering committee decided that recruitment does not constitute the real cost of education, as universities receive funding from the provincial federal government to subsidize recruitment costs. Recommendation 7, there were questions on the student financial assistance. Steering committee decided that financial assistance for international students should be needs-based and include an emergency fund. So we included an emergency fund in the body of the text there. Recommendation 11, steering committee believes that the IELTS is the best choice for determining language proficiency and is widely accepted and respected. We also opted to not be prescriptive with scoring requirements due to perceived opposition from institutions and specific faculties. Steering committee is still advocating for high level of English proficiency. Recommendation 16 currently says the provincial government should allow international students to enroll in the Ontario Health Insurance Plan. As steering committee has opted for a premium, which is included in the body of the text there. Recommendation 17, the new recommendations essentially states that international students should contribute for a fair and proportional cost towards OGIP to that paid by domestic students. Principle 24, it was addressed that refugee-specific concerns were not included, so we did include refugee-specific concerns. Again, for recommendation 24, we've included support services specific to refugees. So there was recommendations for Principle 26 that, so we essentially included a new section on strike protections for students. So for concern 34, we essentially added new data regarding what faculties outbound students are enrolled in. And for recommendation 33, we've ensuring students from all faculties have access to study abroad opportunities. And that is the bulk of the changes that took place last night. Okay.
Thank you very much. Are there any amendments to the policy paper? Any amendments? Yes, Representative Hamad.
I just had a question regarding.
Oh, sorry, can you please speak into your microphone?
I just had a question regarding recommendation 7. I believe we had discussed about having it just be for emergency funds, and will this language then make it so that
prior to looking at amendments. Regarding system load on OHIP, would moving all international students over to OHIP overstress the system that is currently in the political environment? One of the frequent talking points when people talk about OHIP wait times and things like that. Would there be any potential increased stress on the system? In addition, what are people's thoughts on premiums on the OHIP pricing to sort of subvert that load, if there is one? And then secondly, it came up in the focus groups that there was resources offered by UHIP but not by OHIP that have specific recourse to international students, and those things were items such as care for people who have family overseas and then come to Canada and those such things. So I was curious as to whether or not there's an interest in options for students, whether we think that international students in our constituencies may desire those options as opposed to OHIP. Is there an option for choice? These are just questions that I have, and I'd love to hear some insight if you guys could provide some. Thank you.
Recognizing one of the paper's authors.
So this is actually not my section, and I feel it's more appropriate to refer this to Home Office because they have more knowledge on this. Taking Brandon Sloan, maybe.
I can do the health one. So on the issue of whether the system would be overloaded, I think it's important to note that UHIP students are not going to private hospitals. They're already using the services. So if what your discussion was whether hospitals would suddenly have a huge increase of patients, my understanding that wouldn't be the case because they're still already using the services. They're just paying them through a different means.
Yeah, the OHIP isn't a provider, it's an insurance plan. So they're using the same facilities.
Sorry. If you're also concerned potentially with cost, how much it would cost to incorporate international students into OHIP, it would be about $50 million per year. The actual budget for OHIP annually is about $17.4 billion, so this does represent a rather small drop in that budget bucket.
Yes, Representative Zarzur.
Point of clarification, could I just get a response to the service question?
So there's a little bit of difficulty with us determining what uptake of those services are, just because UHIP is so, it really isn't transparent. We're unable to actually get those statistics of how many international students who are enrolled in UHIP are actually taking advantage of those services. So it's difficult for us to actually provide that information.
I would also just clarify that us having a policy on OHIP wouldn't preclude international students from purchasing private health insurance on their own. No, it would not preclude. Obviously, they are allowed to purchase whatever private health insurance plan they feel is most appropriate to their needs.
All right, are there any further amendments or questions or anything like that regarding this policy paper? Seeing none, we will be
Sorry.
Yes, Representative Wright.
Yeah, point of order. Are we still discussing proposed amendments to the policy paper?
Yes.
Okay, then I would like to offer an amendment.
Okay.
Recommendation 30. This is something that came up in one of the breakout meetings. I pointed out debt aversion as specifically as a barrier to outbound students who want to study abroad. And it was put in the concern preceding this recommendation, I believe. That's not good. Whatever the recommendation is regarding outbound students. My apologies. May have been looking at it a little different.
Sorry, I might have misunderstood putting in recommendation 30 as opposed to principle 30. Usually it's all about the regs. Sorry about that.
It is one of the I think it was concern 34. I mean, recommendation 34. point of parliamentary inquiry, could I do an amendment on a body text in tandem with a amendment on a recommendation in the same motion?
It would have to be a recommendation, it would have to be an amendment to the recommendation and then an amendment to the body text. However, I believe it's currently use of practice that if there's a substantive change to a recommendation, that they'll word the body text to surround that as well.
The body text and the recommendation are separate. So it would be a change to the recommendation 34, but a change to the body text of concern 35.
Okay, yeah, that would be two separate amendments.
Two separate amendments.
Yes.
Okay, so the first amendment I'd like to propose is to concern 35. Its data version represents a significant barrier to pursuing education outside of Ontario and requires adequate informational and financial supports backed by institutions and governments to overcome. So that would be my first.
Could you
Okay.
submit that in writing?
It would literally be like adding 2 words.
Sorry.
Requires adequate financial and informational supports.
Is there a seconder for this amendment? Heflin?
Healthman?
Helpman, awesome. And is this friendly?
Yes, it is.
Is that
Okay, because it's seen as friendly, it's been automatically adopted. And you said that you had, sorry, are there any other points or amendments on the floor at this time? Yes.
Thank you. Yes, so the amendment to recommendation 34 with this change in mind would be, so as it reads now, institutions should invest in providing comprehensive study abroad support for outbound students. I would like to change it to comprehensive study abroad for outbound and potentially outbound students.
Is there a seconder for this motion? Elizabeth Bates?
Yeah, I totally agree with you in principle that it should be including the support services, should be including students who are considering it. I'm just wondering if we could reword it to support for prospective outbound students,
Yeah.
which I kind of think the meaning, the semantics behind that sort of includes that, but
Yes, oh, sorry, can you just tilt your microphone so I can say your name? Right, awesome.
Yeah, I didn't get as much time into actually the semantics and the wording that I would like to, so I would be very open to any suggestions that anyone would have with the spirit of this motion at the end.
I guess manager, is the author's amendment relatively moved with the amendment?
it is.
Is his amendment friendly? Is
Yes.
his, okay, so everybody's happy right now? You two are both happy? Awesome, okay, because this is a friendly amendment, it'll be automatically absorbed. Thank you, are there any other amendments to this policy paper? Going once, going twice, the authors are gonna start kicking me under the table. Going 3 times, all right, seeing no further amendments, I'd like to, I guess, move, we're looking at the motion that was originally moved by Klugsberg and seconded by Addison for the approval of the International Students Policy Paper. All those in favor? All those opposed? Excellent. Oh, and any abstentions, sorry. 1 abstention. All right, moving on. We're looking at 8D. Be it further resolved that OUSA Assembly adopts the policy paper update on online learning. Is there a mover for this motion? Klubine? And seconder, Turner? Any discussion on this policy paper? Oh, Garcia?
The only change I made since yesterday's session, woo, recommendation 8, I added the word and, tuition and fees.
I hate it.
All right, we're getting some Are there any further amendments? Further amendments to this policy motion is, be it resolved that OUSA Assembly tasked the steering committee with preparing the above policy papers for submission at the 2014 Fall General Assembly, those being student health, accountability, and student mobility. Do I have a mover for this motion? Carter, seconded by Beckett. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? That's not an abstention. All right, this clearly passes. Now looking at item 10 on the agenda, presentation of bylaws and operating policy changes. Reminder that this is A, and that we have the additional motion, part B, that we have added on after that. So be it resolved that OUSA Assembly adopts the bylaw and operating policy changes.
I was just looking at it.
Ready?
For the stone wood.
Oh, okay. All right. I believe that there's a presentation component of this because it says the word presentation. Is there a presentation? It was already done. Okay. Seeing that there was a presentation, it was already done. All those in favor of adopting the presentation as we saw presented earlier. Oh, and the approval, as well as the approval of the bylaws.
I have a question. Point of clarification, so we actually have a question about the bylaws before we adopt them. Are we actually just adopting them now, or?
Okay, yeah, it just doesn't state in the agenda. It says in the agenda that the presentation of bylaws and operating policy changes. Okay, but we can. Yeah, okay.
So thank you very much. So right now the motion on the floor is be it resolved that OUSA Assembly adopts the bylaw and operating policy changes. Can I have a mover for that motion? Burkock, a seconder. Jill? All right, and is there any points of debate? Chisty?
Alright, so Trustee Queen Zema, so I actually have a question, and I'm hoping Vice President Garcia can clarify these. But there was something about electing the board of directors or the directors, but that we do that at the annual general meeting at the GA in November. So I was wondering why we wouldn't do that in March, because we talked about yesterday how if it was done in November, people would be 6 months into their term. I'm hoping that we'd never be at a point where we wouldn't just want to approve them, but I'm wondering why we wouldn't do that in March. So if there were any issues, we wouldn't be approving them 6 months in, we'd approve them a month in advance. Thank you.
Yes, you may.
Not all of our member associations may have ratified their selection for the steering committee as their steering committee member by the time that we hold our General Assembly, partially because of fluctuating dates, also because different member associations have different timelines for their elections and hirings. So according to the lawyer, as long as they submit the name officially to the corporation of who will be sitting as their director, the replacement is allowed, and then they just still need to be ratified at the annual general meeting. And so that allows for us to be able to ratify everybody at the same time, rather than having kind of like a lag with some.
Any further discussion on the bylaws? Recognizing Faith?
Point of clarification, this was just to bring us in line with the new legislation, right?
Yep.
Recognizing Garcia?
So this is my apology. I did want to, but I did want to make sure that this was as transparent as possible. The steering committee did want to bring forward an amendment to the bylaws as well, so I'll put this forward right now, which is to motion to amend bylaw section 8.01 D. Notwithstanding the foregoing, policies shall cease to be enforced after 4 years from the end of the fiscal year in which it was approved. Currently reads 3, so we'll be changing 3 to 4.
And is there a seconder for this amendment? Seconded by Faith.
So the discussion at steering committee was that we're nearing a time in our policy library size that we will soon not have a whole lot of room to be able to add in new topics. And so this was determined as a mechanism that for policy that does not need to actually be reviewed and rewritten every 3 years, it would be in place for 4 and give each steering committee each year a little bit more flexibility to be able to bring things forward in a timely fashion, leave things as long as they
with some potential concerns. I absolutely think that there's good reasons for extending the expiration date, but I perhaps would like to see it tied to that new, as we've been alluding to, that new way we do policies, and looking at how we can update sections of papers instead of entire policies as a whole. Also, maybe potentially instead of having a blanket deadline that all papers expire in 4 years, that perhaps each paper could have a tied expiration date to it. So some papers that are broader visions that could be lasting for 5 years could be a 5-year paper, and some issues that we know have to come up more often could be a 2 or a 3-year paper. So I'm just like throwing out other options, although I don't disagree with, I guess, the intention of the amendment itself.
All right, recognizing member Klubsberg.
Yeah, just a point of information. Would this extend the deadline of the current papers, or would it just be for all new policies that we pass?
It would, so the way that the bylaw is written is, because we don't set expiration dates on our policies when we approve them, this does mean that everything will last 4 years now. So the ones that we would be approving today with this bylaw would now be enforced for 4 years, unless edited prior to. Right, well, Member Williams just mentioned at steering committee's discretion, yes and no. Steering committee could certainly suggest that we bring something forward earlier to the General Assembly, or General Assembly could task us to bring something forward earlier, but at the end of the day, the bylaws would dictate that everything would cease to be enforced 4 years if it was never touched.
Any further discussion on this amendment to the bylaws for operating statements? Policy. All right, President Eftik Kapoor.
We'll get through one day, I believe. Yeah, I'll be honest, I was in favor. This is a long discussion we've had this year. This was a discussion that's been going on for a number of years, and it was actually one of the first things we talked about at our strategic conference in the summer. OUSA prides itself, as it should, on the incredible policy that it creates, and again, that was the work of today was emblematic of that. Obviously, though, we do have to really be careful and to ensure that we are using our resources effectively. So this isn't just a number that we threw up. We really thought about this one, and wanted to ensure that we could still have updated, timely, topical, sensitive papers while ensuring steering committee has the discretion to, for example, with the differentiation section of the system vision paper, to bring things along faster as they update, while also ensuring that we are realistically using our resources in the policy process. So I really do want to speak in favor of this, and this is something that I will ensure that the next steering committee, and Sean, above all, will ensure that the next steering committee and the new research staff member are transitioned into, knowing that we do still have some work to do on our policy library and our process to ensure that we're using our resources most effectively. But I think this is a good first step in that discussion.
Sean, would you like to add anything to that?
I think I probably have to be sponsored, but...
Would somebody be willing to sponsor Sean?
Thank you.
Thank you, Campbell.
Thank you. So just to add a little bit to it, just to maybe preemptively alleviate any concerns about the timeliness of the data involved. In a practical sense, the way the process works is, as it's been explained, the policy papers are sort of an encyclopedia that we draw the policy statements from, and then we turn into a variety of resources. So if I'm writing a brief, it's built around the policy statement that you guys have approved, but if along the way we decide that the data isn't timely or whatever, we always do a data refresh for the most relevant data in support of the policy as you've approved it. So we're not stuck with the numbers and the facts and the figures and the supporting text, as long as they don't change the argument encapsulated in the policy principle. So I'm not going to go in with the 4-year-old step. There's a newer step.
Any further discussion on this amendment?
scope of when research is being done about a set of populations, so for example, the Aboriginal students, that they prioritize doing research first with the actual people who will be implementing a lot of the procedures. So in this case, the first research to be done hopefully would have been done on the reserves themselves and then to move on to the universities. So I'm just prioritizing that, yes, it's very important that we do consult with these groups.
All right, we're just in a discussion topic now, so if you just like to raise your placard, I'll recognize you when you speak. And if anybody at any point would like to propose an amendment to the operating or whatever this would be an amendment to, then just when you recognize, just say I'd like to make a motion, and then we can work from there. So recognizing Adam Garcia.
I'm just going to throw up our current operating policies on this so you can see them.
Anybody else wishing to speak about this discussion topic? Recognizing Member Keppel.
I would like to add a motion that us as the General Assembly, we motion to have the steering committee create a task force to implement the points that are brought up in this discussion. I think I need a formal motion for that.
All right, and seeing as that motion invoke the points that are brought up in the general discussion, I'd encourage delegates to make points that can be included in that motion.
Point of information, do I need a secondary or a motion for that?
Yeah, can you just, formalize the wording of the motion?
Be it resolved that the OUSA General Assembly tasks the steering committee with hearing and implementing points brought up in discussion regarding operation procedures. If that's satisfactory.
I think that it would be more appropriate if there was more, instead of the term discussion, if we had concrete statements made by members during, those could be incorporated into that. It's not in my place as speaker. I know, I see you. to say that I can't, I do allow this motion to stand. However, I suggest that you withdraw it until we can increase the substantive nature of what you would be tasking steering committee to do.
Okay.
Because right now there's not really any discussion for them to meditate and incorporate into the process. Recognizing President Eftiker Report.
Hey. Yes. Okay. So what I'll say is just on the wording of that. So firstly, just like the idea of steering committee being tasked. I mean, you can. It's probably best to just task the executive officers of the organization because that's your steering committee will be tasking. So may as well get to the point. But I mean, it's semantics or whatever. And then what I would caution is the discussion happening here today, as I said, I would very highly suggest that this be a high-level principle discussion about what we want to see. Again, operating policies are things that we have to, as a board of directors, like legally as well, have to ensure we do a lot of due diligence and investigation and thinking on. Again, I'm coming here with the best of faith, saying that the executive really will just take on the principles discussed, but I would caution against this large body just coming up with things they want to see in operating policy, because that's very in the weeds for a general assembly. So again, I would say have high-level discussions, express some principles, what you want to see, but in terms of creating an actual framework, that's sort of the task of the executive officers. And so we really will do that with the best faith in terms of the little details, but the high level, it happens here.
All right, thank you. Recognizing Representative Graham.
Sorry, this is very much off topic, but our delegation has to leave now. So I would just like to say it's been wonderful working with all of you this year and this weekend. We just have a very important council meeting that pretty much all of our delegation needs to be back for. We're discussing some pretty critical things. So with that being said, please excuse us. We're getting up and leaving. Thank you so much.
Recognizing
prefer an operating policy to just a more ad hoc approach? Because we already have the operating policy, we're just gonna have to.
Vice President Garcia.
Yeah, maybe just kind of echoing some of Amir's comments. At the end of the day, like whatever you would like to see in the next Aboriginal students policy paper, I would hope that you would like to see kind of consistently. So in which case it should be reflected in our operating policies. Maybe just to highlight that they are up there, and maybe Sean, if you could just scroll up to specifically the Aboriginal consultation one. So just to clarify exactly where we were talking about earlier, the policy is very short. OUSA must consult with members of the Aboriginal community when producing policy that will directly or primarily affect Aboriginal students, and all efforts should be made to consult with a social, regional, and generationally diverse group of Aboriginal students, and where relevant to the broader Aboriginal community, which is where those service providers would come in and community leaders. And then finally, no formal policy specifically concerning Aboriginal issues can be ratified by OUSA without first consulting with the Aboriginal community. So essentially, I would just also like to make sure that in thinking about any, in kind of having a discussion that might shape any changes to this policy, just keep in mind that some of the comments that were made earlier by the authors of the Aboriginal students policy paper were surrounding the idea of, you know, when we make reasonable efforts, that doesn't necessarily mean that we always get a response. And so if having the feedback incorporated into the policy is absolutely critical, that can hamper the ability to pass policies. So I'm not saying that's either good or bad. I'm just saying that make sure that you're aware of that kind of in the back of your brain, that policy would be out of order if it got to this kind of stage without incorporating policy, if that's what you mandate us to do. We can't do anything with it at the end of the day if it doesn't include what you ask it to.
All right, there are a number of speakers, interested speakers on the agenda right now, so looking first at Wright.
With John.
Okay, looking next at Kemble.
I would like to say, I mean, like, yes, it's in there, but it's not in there as a priority to take place. And I think, I mean, especially the Aboriginal paper, it really should be a priority in terms of making sure that you're prioritizing talking with these individuals and maybe not including points without first consulting with them. They're really intuitive in getting that feedback.
All right, would you like a response? Okay, response from one of the authors of the policy paper.
Thank you. So just to speak to that, I think I'm generally in favor of keeping things broad in nature, just because otherwise it's fairly limiting in we must do X, Y, and Z, but if there's other things out there for us to be doing, those should be included. And that this policy gives us the best ability to do that. So for example, myself, TK, and a few home office staff went to the Indigenous Issues in Post-Secondary Education Conference. That wouldn't necessarily be in the context of what you're prescribing. However, with the broader frame of reference, we can do that, and we did that because we felt that the employment section of the paper was coming up. This was a great conference to augment that, and we took away a lot of key findings from that, which shaped the paper. But if we scope it down and we only do those few things, first of all, we don't have to do anything else. But second of all, it doesn't give us necessarily the time because our resources are already going to be used to fulfill the operating policy that we're setting out, which is scoped down. So maybe we don't get as good a policy as if we had the leeway to go and use whatever means necessary to get the consultation.
Recognizing Member Zarzor.
Collins Arthur, Queens AMS. So I'll try to keep this as general as I could. I just think that when consulting, when we're writing and looking into policy and doing research for a specific group of people, I think that would be interesting to see a part of our operating policy that's targeted towards, like, of course our priority is the students, and so consultation with students is key. But in addition to that, there's more reasons for consultation than just gathering the student voice. It's also, like, I think it would be important to look to finding leaders of the groups that we were talking about. And so for me, like, my stance on this piece, at least, is I don't understand why in an Aboriginal paper in which chiefs and sort of nation leaders who represent not only political but actual, like, cultural figureheads for those people weren't consulted. And I understand actually that the research that had been done already was quite extensive. And I know that the resources are limited, But I guess my point is that it should just be a priority. It should be one of the first things that we spend resources and time on. And that's just where I'm coming from, and I would hope that I think that's where David's coming from too. Or Andrew, sorry, my apologies. So what's that?
Recognizing Member Rose.
Just like to compliment what's being said lately, I feel like adding to the particularity of how the resources are used and speaking with the people that aren't students that are potentially going to be students or that represent those that are potentially going to be students is a perspective that should be accounted for. And I feel like you can still have a generality kind of after the fact while including that. I don't think that'll necessarily hinder anything.
Recognizing Member Little.
Hi. So I'm not really sure if people are suggesting that we, like in French, like they must talk to like Aboriginal leaders in the community. I'm a little concerned about doing that, even though I think it's really good to reach out to them. I know that there's often a lot of distrust between Aboriginal community leaders and outside groups such as OUSA that don't have strong Aboriginal participation, and we might actually have issues getting them to consult with us. And if like it's in the policy and we can't get someone, I'm concerned we wouldn't be able to pass any policy.
Looking at Representative Ahmad. Sorry, Kevin.
One of the reasons why I wonder if there's distrust is because we don't consult with them in the first place. Here we are passing policy papers, doing some consultation with the institutes and the centers that are already at a post-secondary level, but without going first to the grubbers and without first going there in the first place. So, I mean, I think, I just want to reiterate, I think that is not an oversight of the authors. I do think that this is an oversight in just the way that OUSA is going about conducting their research on this. I think specifically, I mean, Colin, the representative from AMS, I think said it very well in that it should be much more of a priority. It should be in there as all efforts should be made to consult with. It should be, I mean, we are consulting with these individuals. We are taking in this feedback. We are hearing about from the people that our policies that we're advocating for are going to be kind of following through with. And I would say, I do think it should be a priority.
Recognizing Representative Zarzor.
Yeah, this is a bit of a point of information / personal privilege. I don't think that you necessarily misrepresented my point at all. I think you got it on. I just want to sort of clarify that insofar as efforts should be made, even if and I do think it should be a priority. I do understand that after like sort of extraneous efforts, results may still be limited, and I think that it should be the discretion of the sort of policy writers as well as the researchers whether or not the efforts have been made have yielded so few results that you simply couldn't move forward anymore. And I understand the difficulties of those situations and unique difficulties may arise while trying to write the paper. So I want to just sort of acknowledge, like I'm not just sort of making this prioritization saying you have to get it done, like no matter what, it has to like dictate the entirety of the process. I want to recognize the policy writers' autonomy on that. I just want to sort of state the importance of it. That's all.
Recognizing Member Kemble.
At this point, I would like to have actually a question for the steering committee in terms of, I mean, have you heard this kind of feedback, and I guess where are you thinking now that the General Assembly is kind of thinking about this topic of research? I'm just wondering if this discussion has been useful at all, or if it's, I guess if there's no kind of progress forward from that.
Yeah, I mean, what I've heard is sort of what I anticipated, that I think the primary crux is discussion with those who are not just students, right? So community leaders, prospective students, that's sort of what I'm hearing, and that's sort of what I anticipated that we'd be hearing. Yeah, I mean, I totally think that that is fair, it's in line, particularly, you know, if we're talking about ban policy, we do extensive work into that research, but that is, you know, is typically secondary research. So certainly there's room for primary research if resources and stuff allow. I mean, so I would be friendly on that. I would just want to manage expectations that OUSA, just quite simply, guys, we just don't have the ability to consult every everybody. We just literally don't have the money. Um, if member associations, if that is such a big priority, then maybe that is a different discussion about resources, quite simply. But one of the reasons, we do a lot of research still, but we use secondary research a lot of the time because that's just the best, oftentimes both great quality work and in line with our resource capacity. So that's what I'm hearing. I mean, I'm totally friendly to taking the idea of wider consultations and discussions and going back to this operating policy and really looking to incorporate that. So that's what I've been hearing. I think that was constructive. I would just, again, want to manage expectations.
Point of information.
Yes.
Philip White, Queens AMS. So can we actually write specifically what the change is? So it's all efforts must, or it must, consultation must take place, or all efforts should be made? I just lost in terms of what we're saying.
We don't have a motion on the floor right now.
Just as a point of order, the Assembly doesn't actually have the authority to change operating policy changes, so we're absorbing all of this and taking it, and then we'll have to go back to the steering committee meeting and make the change.
Well, there's a bit of a speakers list going right now, looking at member Franchotto, withdrawn, member Garcia, withdrawn, member Chisty.
To HC Queens AMS, I really like the points that are being brought up here, but I do think we should also keep in mind that this isn't specific to Aboriginal students or learners. This should be something that applies to any access paper in general. And I think this is reflected for the most part regardless, but I don't think we should be having a conversation just about this when OUSA does multiple policy papers on